Welcome back, randos, to the final part of my series analysing Season 1 of Arcane. This video is going to focus on Act 3, so there will be spoilers for the entirety of Season 1. At the time of recording this, Season 2 has not aired, so there will be no spoilers for Season 2, but there will be some speculation. As always, if you have not watched Arcane yet, I strongly suggest turning this video off and watching Season 1 before continuing. Before we dig into the final chapter of Season 1 of Arcane, I will give a brief recap of what actually happens. Vi and Caitlyn have been captured by the Firelights, who are revealed to be led by Ekko. They decide to return the gemstone to Piltover to ease tensions and prove that the Firelights were not responsible for Jinx's attacks in Act 2. Marcus intercepts them on the bridge and attempts to kill them and recover the gemstone, but before he can commit to this, Jinx causes a massive explosion on the bridge, killing Marcus. Ekko stays behind to fight Jinx whilst Vi and Caitlyn continue into Piltover, and he manages to defeat her. Silco then takes her body to Singed, and she is pumped full of shimmer and revived. The Council of Piltover debates what they should do about the Undercity. After the explosion on the bridge, Jayce ultimately decides to weaponize Hextech, and both he and Vi strike at Silco's shimmer facilities to destabilize his control of the Undercity. Jayce then offers Silco sovereignty, but in return, he must hand over Jinx. Shortly afterwards, Jinx captures Vi, Caitlyn, and Silco. Vi attempts to force her sister to remember who she is in order to protect Caitlyn. Silco tries to shoot Vi, and Jinx reflexively shoots Silco before firing a Hextech rocket at the council chamber in Piltover, just as they pass a motion to agree to Jayce and Silco's terms. Let's begin by looking at Ekko. Where was Ekko when we last saw him? He witnessed Benzo, his boss and potential adoptive father, being murdered by Silco. He followed Silco and was able to tell Vi where Vander had been taken. After speaking with Vi, we do not see him again until Act 2. This means that Ekko decided not to go with Vi, nor did he decide to take refuge at the last drop. Rather interestingly, had he done so, he may have inadvertently managed to prevent the tragic climax of Act 1, as he may have encountered Powder and managed to keep her emotions in check. What specifically happened to Ekko after the events of Act 1 is unknown, so presumably he was overcome with grief, kept to himself, and eventually found what would later become the Firelights' hideout. This brings us to Ekko in Act 2. He is extremely confident and highly skilled, and deliberate emphasis is placed on his acknowledgement of the passage of time. This doesn't mean a huge amount narratively, but it is a nice Easter egg for fans of the game that potentially will become more important in Season 2. His goal is clearly to destroy Silco's shimmer, and at this point we can infer that he essentially wants to fuck with Silco's wallet. Shimmer is critical to Silco's plan, and although Ekko likely does not know about Silco's ultimate goal, he does know that Silco is a violent crime lord who is responsible for a huge amount of suffering in the Undercity, and at this point he would have believed Vi was also dead. Ekko's choice of weapon is interesting because although the Firelights obviously have access to rudimentary weapons such as sharp sticks and clubs, they also choose to use non-lethal stun grenades. Given that we never see anything like this stun crystal grenade thing anywhere else in the show, it is entirely possible that Ekko or one of his people developed this technology specifically to be less than lethal. This choice of weapon therefore tells us that Ekko does not want to kill people. That is a line that he has no intention of crossing, and he even prevents his Biker Mice from Mars buddy from executing Vi in episode 6. However, after Jinx murders the Firelight girl on the airship, Ekko becomes enraged and charges at Jinx before he is forced to flee. Additionally, at the end of episode 7, Ekko brutally beats Jinx but is unable to put her down. All of this shows us that Ekko is clearly not the confident and intimidating gangster that he pretends to be. He absolutely reacts emotionally, and he relies heavily on his friends to keep him on track. This is one way that the writers remind us that Ekko was the youngest of the group in Act 1, which means that at most he is 15 or 16 years old by the time we hit Act 2. His life experiences have forged him into something greater than he was, but he is still a kid who is way out of his depth. This brings us to Act 3. Ekko and his men have been following Vi and Caitlyn for a while to work out what they are doing. Ekko would of course have recognized Vi, realized that something did not add up, and so presumed that they were doing something shady on behalf of Silco. Ekko is intensely distrustful of Vi. He does not speak to her as a friend or as an admirer as he once did, but as her captor. Even after Vi tries to explain, Ekko has no idea what to think. He believed that Vi was dead, and then suddenly she shows back up accompanied by an enforcer and Jinx. From his perspective, she absolutely could be working for Silco. Jinx obviously already does, Caitlyn could be a corrupt cop, and Vi could have been roped into working for Silco willingly or otherwise. Ekko's admiration of Vi, followed by her apparent death, combined with his experiences as presumably a vagrant over the last few years, has hardened Ekko into a totally different person to who he was as a child. Granted, we don't really get to know Ekko in Act 1, but we learn enough for this to be a drastic shift in his personality. Life has changed him. He has focused much of his attention on interfering with Silco's business, and so he directly asks Vi what appears to her and the audience to be an absurd question.
Are you working for Silco?
And Vi, of course, responds accordingly.
Fuck you.
Throughout Acts 2 and 3, Ekko presents himself as being far more confident than he actually is. After Vi tells him,
I should have been there. For you. For everyone.
Ekko advises her not to dwell on the past.
That's a good way to drive yourself crazy.
He claims to think that it is a waste of time worrying about things outside of your control, and feeling guilty about what you could have done now that you have the benefit of hindsight. However, the very next line we get from Ekko is,
If I just went with you that day, maybe none of this would have happened.
This line suggests that Ekko is himself feeling guilty and is worrying about how he potentially could have prevented all of this misery, and rather than being a direct contradiction of his sentiments seconds earlier, this indicates that Ekko has been down that path, and he is trying to make sure that Vi does not. Ekko appears to have known that Powder and Jinx were the same person, as when he and Vi discussed the topic, this is not treated as any kind of revelation to Ekko. He is also, quite understandably, far more pessimistic than Vi regarding Jinx, likely because where Vi has been in prison, Ekko has been watching Powder's descent into madness. It is unclear at what point Ekko realized that they are the same person, but it is entirely possible that he watched from a distance as Powder became less and less like his childhood friend. Rather importantly, this also means that when Ekko attacked the airship and attempted to attack Jinx in a fit of rage, he was very aware that this was the same girl he once knew. He and the other Firelights built a shrine to all of the people they have lost to Silco and the Enforcers, including Vander, Benzo, Clagger, Milo, Vi, and Powder. There are at least 14 other faces on this mural, and Ekko refers to them as the price of our freedom. He believes that he needs to continue the fight against Silco and the Enforcers, despite the fact that lives will continue to be lost, so as to ensure that these people did not die in vain. He shows this mural to Vi to convince her that Powder has been lost. But if anything, this accomplishes the opposite. Vi is of course herself present on this mural. This is because Ekko believed her to be dead when she was actually in prison, but regardless, the fact that Vi is on the mural, and yet is standing right next to Ekko, is evidence to Vi that Ekko is wrong about Powder. Just like her, Powder is not lost. Ekko's relationship with Caitlyn is very tenuous as a direct result of her being an enforcer. He is willing to escort her back to Piltover due to the fact that Vi vouched for her, but he is unwilling to help her in any other manner. He doesn't like her at all because of who she is and where she is from. This is also why he is extremely reluctant to cooperate whatsoever with Marcus on the bridge, because he hates the Enforcers and he does not trust Marcus. Caitlyn believes that Piltover is hunting the Firelights due to a simple misunderstanding, but Ekko reveals that all of this is as a direct result of Silco's wealth and power. He doesn't know the specifics involving Jinx's bomb and Marcus's lie to Jayce, but he does absolutely know that at least some of the Enforcers are working for Silco, as Ekko was of course present when the shit hit the fan in episode 3, when Benzo was murdered and Marcus got paid. He therefore concludes, quite correctly, that Silco is puppeteering the Enforcers so as to turn their attention away from him and towards the Firelights, thereby removing one of his greatest obstacles. Ekko is also smart enough to use the gemstone as a test for Caitlyn. If she is truly not his enemy, as Vi is claiming, then she will be honest with him and explain what it is and why she wants it, which is exactly what happens. After Caitlyn explains what the gemstone is, Ekko says,
"Let us use it against him."
He believes that he potentially has the skills to be able to harness its power. As Ekko has never seen this thing before, and as he, unlike Jinx, does not have Jayce's notebook, I don't think Ekko would have a hope in hell of being able to weaponize the gemstone. However, he is certainly not wrong for wanting to try. He agrees to go along with Caitlyn's plan, but his condition is that he personally be the one to give the gemstone back to the Council. This is another smart move, as this will ensure that the Council understands that the Firelights are not their enemy. It will also allow him to directly explain to the Council what has been going on in the Undercity, which Vi and Caitlyn would only be approximately aware of. In League of Legends, Ekko's abilities are centered upon time manipulation, with his ultimate ability allowing him to rewind time and undo both his movement and any damage he took over the last few seconds. This is not present in Arcane, although there are multiple references to the connection Ekko has with time travel throughout the series, such as his first lines in the show,
"Give me a few seconds,"
as well as his use of a stopwatch to keep track of precisely how much time they have until their crystal bombs wear off. Neither of these are overt, neither of them are shoehorny, and none of them detract from the show for those viewers who are unfamiliar with the champion from League of Legends. The most extensive and direct reference to Ekko's timey-wimey bullshit comes during his fight on the bridge with Jinx. He whips out his stopwatch, we then see Jinx and Ekko appear as their younger selves, the animation style changes dramatically, and the music starts pumping. Much like Arcane as a whole, this is not storytelling that exists only for fans of the game. This is storytelling that exists primarily to service the characters and themes. The extra bit of magic is that the writers and animators were able to slide in a direct reference to Ekko's toolkit from League of Legends, not only without detracting from what was actually happening in the scene itself, but by using this to show how Ekko and Powder used to play as kids, and then contrasting this with the lethal stakes of their current battle. This idea may well have started with someone being like, okay, so Ekko does time travel, and so we need to reference this in Arcane at some point. And then, because the writers are incredibly good at their jobs, they managed to turn what may well have been something mandated by the powers that be into something that is not only visually outstanding, but also very emotionally effective. This is how you do fan service. You do not service your fans at the expense of your story, you service your fans and you service your story. So, here is what we see in order. Kid Ekko runs towards Jinx. Powder raises her pistol. Jinx fires it. Powder fires the same shot, but her bullets are paintballs. Kid Ekko dodges the paint, whilst Ekko dodges the bullet. Jinx fires another shot, which Ekko dodges. Ekko dodges bullets again. Kid Ekko gets hit by paint. Powder celebrates, and Kid Ekko is pissed off that he lost the game. In a nutshell, this sequence of events shows Ekko getting shot by Jinx. Time then appears to rewind back to the start of the fight, the animation style switches back to normal, and Ekko closes the distance very quickly, dodges 4 shots from Jinx, and subdues her with his club. During this stylized sequence, as Jinx raises her pistol to shoot at Ekko, she transitions from Powder into Jinx, symbolizing a fundamental change in her character. Powder was not a violent child, and so as soon as she aims her pistol at Ekko, she grows up. Willingness to hurt other people is part of what makes Jinx who she is. Additionally, in the background of the shots focused on Ekko, we can see the firelight bugs, symbolizing who Ekko has become. And behind Jinx, we see an ominous raven, seen frequently in the latter half of Arcane, and typically symbolizing a bad omen or bad luck, again, something that is core to Jinx's character. This fight scene can be interpreted in a couple of ways. Ekko and Powder used to play together, and after Ekko pulls out his stopwatch, Jinx starts laughing and shakes her head before loading her pistol, indicating that this was a game that they played as children. Powder would shoot at Ekko with one of the toy guns from the arcade, and it appears that Powder would usually win. Ekko both envisions how their game used to play out, and he also baits Jinx into playing with him one final time, which is how he manages to defeat her. He gets Jinx to play by the rules that he and Powder played by as kids, which is why Jinx loses. Of course, it may be revealed in Season 2 that this stopwatch is literally a time machine, and Ekko used it to see the future, learn Jinx's attack pattern, and then defeat her, but this is not necessary for the scene to function. This scene fully utilizes the strengths of the medium of animation to give us the kind of fight scene that could not be accomplished any other way. This is creative, effective, and beautiful to look at. A short while after the fight, Ekko encounters Heimerdinger, recognizes him, and, rather surprisingly, is not at all hostile towards him. Ekko has been shown to be a rather hostile individual, understandably hostile, but hostile nonetheless. He has a very specific grievance with Piltover, and he recognizes Heimerdinger as being one of Piltover's counselors. In other words, from Ekko's perspective, Heimerdinger is a large part of why the Undercity is the way it is, and so he has every reason to be fucking furious with him. However, on the flip side, Ekko very recently beat his childhood friend almost to death, and as far as Ekko is aware, Jinx may have died in the resulting explosion. Ekko is quite clearly emotionally shattered given what just happened. Heimerdinger's first words to Ekko are to ask him if he is alright, at which point Ekko recognizes him.
Are you Counselor Heimerdinger?
And given Heimerdinger's reputation, and given Ekko's apparent interest and skill in tinkering with technology, Ekko is more than likely somewhat starstruck at randomly meeting the Dean of the Academy of Science, hence him not questioning Heimerdinger further at this point. I do think that Season 2 absolutely needs to address Ekko and Heimerdinger's conflict, but I can understand why Ekko did not start arguing with Heimerdinger in this particular scene. This scene also marks a rather dramatic shift in Ekko's characterization following the fight on the bridge. He goes from an aggressive, paranoid, and highly strung vigilante to a somewhat bubbly, laid-back, and calm individual.
You look good for a dead girl. What do you know about this? Your people hunt us. Like animals. Say that one more time. Are you Counselor Heimerdinger? We're having the exact same day. You'd be surprised what you can pull off when your life depends on it. It's not enough to give people what they need to survive. You have to give them what they need to live.
His tone of voice is drastically less antagonistic, and this is presumably because he believes that he has just killed his childhood friend and avenged the various Firelights she murdered. Ekko's final couple of scenes involve him introducing Heimerdinger to the Firelights' hideout, and we then see them tinkering with a clock during the final montage of episode 9. Ekko is a very solid character in Arcane, and in most other shows he would be among the best. He is well fleshed out, in particular given his limited screen time of 28 minutes. However, in a show with characters as good as the ones in Arcane, he inevitably slides towards the bottom of the pack. In Act 1, he primarily serves as a repeated plot device. In Act 2, he is a masked vigilante who follows the other characters, and 90% of his characterization takes place solely in Episode 7. There is nothing particularly wrong with his characterization, but outside of his fight with Jinx on the bridge, which is one of the best scenes in the show, nothing about Ekko particularly stands out either. Moving on to Caitlyn. Caitlyn was the primary source of narrative thrust in Act 2, whereas in Act 3 she certainly takes more of a back seat and primarily serves as a pawn to be fought over. As we open Act 3, Caitlyn is pretty certain that she has been abducted by Silco. She, at this point, believes that Vi fundamentally cannot be trusted because she did not at any point tell Caitlyn that Jinx is her sister, and so Caitlyn assumes that the people that have abducted them are working for Silco. This doesn't make much sense because this would mean that Silco sent his own men to attack Jinx, but given the sheer chaos that unfolded in Episode 6, Caitlyn absolutely will not have the same information we as the audience have. She figures that her captors, whom she assumes to be working for Silco, are primarily or solely interested in Caitlyn herself. This is false, but again, absolutely makes sense given what Caitlyn knows. She is an enforcer who has been poking around in Silco's affairs with the goal of bringing him down. She is also trying to recover the gemstone that she knows to have been taken by Jinx. As far as Caitlyn is concerned, Silco should only view Vi as a tool that was used to get her close enough to do this. And this is entirely because Caitlyn does not understand the relationship that Vi has with Jinx, which is yet another example of a totally reasonable character-driven misunderstanding in Arcane. Rather confusingly, however, Caitlyn seems to think that the enforcers mistakenly believe that the Firelights work for Silco.
If your people had your way, it'd be rubble and ash.
It's a misunderstanding. They think you work for Silco.
This doesn't make any sense whatsoever, but the more important question is, does it make any sense that Caitlyn could believe this to be true? Because Ekko says, your people, he could be referring specifically to the enforcers or to topsiders in general. And I think that this makes far more sense if he is referring to the Council. We as the audience know that the Council knows that Silco exists, but they do not believe him to be a criminal. We also know that Marcus, on Silco's instruction, lied to the Council by claiming that Jinx's bomb was a Firelight bomb. The whole purpose of this action was to divert attention away from Silco and onto the Firelights, which wouldn't make any sense if the Council believed that the Firelights and Silco were on the same team. So if we instead look at what Caitlyn actually knows, she knows that Silco is a criminal, and she is trying to prove it. She has seen plenty of evidence of this with her own eyes to confirm this suspicion. She also has no knowledge of the fact that Silco is trying to pin Jinx's crimes on the Firelights. Her statement that Piltover thinks that the Firelights work for Silco can only make sense if she has conflated working with Silco with working for the bad guys, which I'm not sure I would call a weak line of dialogue, but it is certainly a bit of a weird one. Caitlyn goes on to challenge Ekko when he suggests that the Enforcers are a corrupt institution. Caitlyn highly values law, order, and integrity. She admired Grayson, and she at the very least respects Marcus. And as I theorized in part 2, it is not unlikely that Grayson's death directly led to her becoming an Enforcer herself. Caitlyn is defined by her desire to fight crime and protect the innocent, and it is therefore inconceivable to her that the Enforcers are being manipulated by Silco. Caitlyn is highly motivated to recover the gemstone, and despite this not appearing to be her original objective, she reveals that she did know pretty much everything that we, the audience, knew. Initially, her objective seemed to be to acquire evidence to prove that Silco was responsible for the attacks at the Hex Gates and in the Square, but evidently recovering the gemstone was also one of her goals. Caitlyn knows what it is, which makes sense because she is good friends with Jayce, the man who created it. She also explains to Vi and Ekko that it was stolen by Jinx in the attack, which makes sense because Caitlyn saw Jinx at the crime scene, and her mother may well have told her about this off-screen after Jayce informed the council. Caitlyn certainly appears to sympathize with Ekko and acknowledges that he and the Firelights are being mistreated. I don't think that she is entirely convinced yet that Silco is the reason why the Enforcers are hunting the Firelights, but regardless, she understands why he feels the way he does. She explains to Ekko that whilst she understands why he would want to keep the gemstone, if he does, the violence will not stop. Ekko having the gemstone may mean that Jinx or some other scientifically minded individual with nefarious intentions towards Piltover will not be able to weaponize it against them. However, the Enforcers will not stop until they find it, and the Council would absolutely not accept the Firelights having the gemstone if they were to ever find out where it is. Caitlyn appeals directly to what Ekko wants, and she is able to convince him to help her, an Enforcer whom he would never usually trust. Skipping forwards to the bridge, Caitlyn tells Marcus,
I have proof. Silco's behind everything.
Caitlyn does not actually have any proof. She has Ekko, a gang leader and a criminal, who plans to testify to the council as to Silco's involvement. She also has the gemstone, which will put the council's mind at ease and help them more readily accept Ekko's account. Is this a step in the right direction? Absolutely. Is this the silver bullet that will bring down Silco? Absolutely not. However, Caitlyn very likely believes that what Ekko has to say will be enough to force the council to take down Silco, and she of course believes Marcus to be on her side. After the end of episode 7, Caitlyn takes a back seat to the other primary characters. This is not necessarily a problem, however, because this is the end of her story, or at least it is the end of this chapter of her story. She went into the Undercity to find proof of Silco's involvement in the attacks in Piltover, and she has returned to the council having seen this with her own eyes and with Vi's testimony. Her relationship with Vi also primarily manifests in Act 3. Her parents had sheltered her from seeing the world, and she recently experienced a totally different culture in a very short amount of time. She managed to prove to Vi that not all Enforcers are assholes, and Vi proved to Caitlyn that not every criminal is a deranged scumbag. The writers do not simply leave this relationship as a platonic one, however, and they make it pretty explicit that the two are romantically interested in each other. However, Vi cuts things off before anything actually happens. So, given that nothing actually happens between Vi and Caitlyn, what exactly is the purpose of having them be romantically interested in each other? Primarily, the purpose this serves is that it allows their displays of affection to be misinterpreted by Jinx, which then plays directly into the season finale. Jinx's paranoia leads her to believe that Vi has replaced her with Caitlyn, and if Vi and Caitlyn were very obviously just friends, then this would require a bit more in the way of mental gymnastics from Jinx to justify this belief. However, these handful of tiny moments between Vi and Caitlyn cause Jinx to think that Vi has found someone else to love and take care of, rather than that Vi has just found a new friend. Part of why this is so effective is because Jinx is not making this up out of nowhere. there is a hint of truth to it. You could perhaps describe Vi and Caitlyn's short-lived romance as manipulative, as the purpose it serves is to make Jinx freak out and misunderstand what is actually happening, which, of course, doesn't have anything to do with the actual bond between Vi and Caitlyn. I would very much like to see their relationship explored further in Season 2, because in Season 1, the function of the romance is primarily to service Jinx's character, not Vi or Caitlyn's. In the final moments of Season 1, Caitlyn watches helplessly as Jinx's missile heads towards the council chamber, knowing that her mother is about to die. Caitlyn in Act 2 was a fantastic example of how effectively one single character can drive large portions of the narrative through their actions. By the time we reach Act 3, however, Caitlyn has largely served her purpose. I won't say that I'm disappointed by her lack of impact in Act 3, because some characters becoming more and less important as a story progresses is an inevitable part of storytelling. But I will say that of the 5 characters in Season 1 with over an hour of total screen time, Caitlyn is the weakest. I am, however, very much looking forward to seeing what the writers do with this character going forward. Moving on to Vi, who spends most of Act 3 sharing her scenes with Caitlyn. The first thing that happens in Act 3 is that Vi reacts very emotionally to Caitlyn's accusations.
When were you planning to tell me that your lunatic sister works for him?
Just as soon as you came clean about what the hell you're really doing down here.
I told you the truth!
Bullshit.
She now knows about the existence of the Hextech gemstone, and that Caitlyn wants it, and she correctly assumes that Caitlyn is not willing to reveal what she knows. Vi wants to know what the gemstone is because she wants to understand what Jinx was doing with it, and she doesn't like at all that Caitlyn has declined to explain this to her, seeing this as Caitlyn getting in her way. Vi also immediately antagonizes her captor before he reveals his identity.
You shy or just ugly?
All of this is entirely coherent for Vi. As Ekko observes, she still has a tendency to block with her face. This concept can be taken literally. When fighting, she chooses flat-out aggression, punching her opponents harder than they punch her, with defending herself being a secondary concern. This can also be taken metaphorically. Vi is overconfident, doesn't think things through, and her actions often lead to her friends getting hurt. Whilst this may well have been very accurate when Vi was a child, this is not entirely accurate anymore, as Vi has learned a thing or two since she last spoke to Ekko. Given that the circumstances under which Vi was captured were not circumstances under which Vi was behaving recklessly, she was sucker-punched because she was in shock at Powder's enjoyment in being violent, Vi did let her guard down, but this was not an instance of her blocking with her face. Vi then lockpicks her handcuffs without Ekko noticing, which is a bit tropey, and I'm not entirely sure if I buy this. The reason the writers did this is so as to have Vi surprise Ekko and hug him, which leads to an emotional moment between the two of them, but it requires that Ekko didn't see what Vi was doing whilst looking right at her, and it requires that Vi is dexterous enough to be able to do this in the first place. The Vi way of dealing with being handcuffed to a pole would be to rip the thing off with sheer brute force, not fiddle around with a teeny tiny lockpick and carefully maneuver it until the handcuffs come loose. Had this been set up earlier as being something Vi might be able to do or have reason to learn how to do, then it may have been more believable. However, on the flip side of this, in surprising Ekko by revealing that not only is she alive, not only is she not working for Silco, and not only is she still fundamentally the same person that he remembers, she has also evidently learned how to pick a lock. In other words, immediately after Ekko accuses her of blocking with her face, thereby implying that Vi is still a reckless person who doesn't think about the consequences of her actions, Vi then demonstrates that she is not that person anymore. Vi is later shown to be very impressed by Caitlyn's investigative work prior to her going to the Undercity, and the writers use this moment to allow Vi to draw a direct link between Caitlyn and Powder.
And I thought Powder could get obsessed.
This helps to justify Jinx's paranoia to some degree, as we, the audience, can see that Vi is noticing subtle similarities between the two of them. However, her trust and faith in Caitlyn's dedication ends up being futile, as the meeting with the council does not go as planned, leading Vi to believe that Caitlyn cannot fix this. Vi accepts that life will continue in the way that it always has, and that if she wants to deal with Silco, she has to do this alone. As she says goodbye to Caitlyn, she explains that like Piltover and the Undercity, she and Caitlyn are like oil and water. They are incompatible. This is partly because Vi is about to go and do something very dangerous, with her survival not being guaranteed, and partly because they disagree on how to deal with Silco.
We have to go in by force.
There are good people down there.
You want to negotiate with him?
This is insane. Did you learn nothing?
Caitlyn exemplifies law, order, and justice, and Vi believes that this approach has just failed them in the council meeting. Vi's continuous pursuit of her sister is entirely informed by the climax of Act 2, where she was almost able to reach her before they were interrupted by the Firelights. When Vi chooses to take Caitlyn to Piltover and leave Ekko to fend off Jinx, Vi knows something bad will very likely happen as a result of this. She had previously discussed the nature of Jinx with Ekko, and although she flatly refused to accept that Powder was gone, Ekko has seen who Powder has become. Even by the end of Season 1, Vi does not ever learn for certain what the outcome of the fight actually was, and until the end of Episode 9, she will have been under the belief that either Ekko or Jinx or both of them were dead. When it is revealed that Jinx is not dead, this should have strongly suggested to Vi that Jinx killed Ekko. And whilst I don't think it would have been appropriate for her to have asked what Jinx did to Ekko during the final scene of Episode 9, I am very much expecting that going forward, Vi will believe that Ekko is dead until she sees evidence to the contrary. Shortly after arriving in Piltover, Vi explains to Caitlyn that when she was a child, she and Powder used to share a bed. They would play a game where they pretended to be bigger and bigger monsters, Powder would get scared, and Vi would then chase her made-up monsters away to protect her sister. Then, as she says, a real monster showed up, and not only was Vi unable to protect her sister, but she ran away. 2 words: extreme guilt. This is how you do this. Vi punishes herself for what happened to her sister, even though, as I went through in Act 1, Vi's reaction to Vanda's death was entirely reasonable from her perspective. That does not matter in the slightest to Vi anymore. This is entirely her fault, and so it is up to her to make it right. Again, because the writers of Arcane are extremely good at what they do not just use this monologue to tell us about how guilty Vi feels, but they also show us how much she trusts Caitlyn, as Caitlyn is the only person that Vi will show any vulnerability to. When Vi and Caitlyn speak to the council, Vi identifies Jinx as the creator of the bomb given to Jayce by Marcus earlier in the season. This is going to take some dissecting. On face value, it appears that Vi has just acted against her own interests. She has put her sister in danger by naming her as an associate of Silco's and by identifying her as being behind the various attacks on the Enforcers. She has also just given this information to the Council of Piltover, who have repeatedly been shown to be incompetent. The reason why the writers need this to happen is so that Jayce can demand that Silco turns Jinx over to him, which of course requires that Jayce knows who Jinx is, which then directly leads into the climax of the series and the conclusion of Silco's character arc. The Council, therefore, needs to learn that Jinx is responsible for all of this carnage. This is going to take quite a bit of justifying, but the writers do actually give us an explanation for why Vi would do this. Firstly, Caitlyn and Cassandra have proven to be willing to at least hear Vi out. Jayce also stressed moments earlier that they needed to do something to prevent further loss of life, which indicates to Vi that the Council very clearly needs her help, and they appear to be willing to actually listen to her. Additionally, in keeping with Vi's lesson to Caitlyn in Act 2, Vi is trying to use the Council to get what she wants, and so she is convincing them that she has what they want: Jinx. Vi's objective here is to bring down Silco, and she believes that if Silco is dealt with, she will get her sister back. Importantly, Vi at this point does not consider Jinx and Powder to be the same person. She is fundamentally unwilling to accept this reality. This scene is in fact the first time that Vi names her sister as Jinx.
Her name is Jinx.
She does refer to her as Jinx earlier in episode 6.
What was the name Sevika gave you? Jinx.
Right. Jinx. How could I forget?
But in this instance, Vi is simply repeating what Caitlyn has just said. Conversely, Vi conclusively names Jinx as the person who made the bomb, and as the person behind the recent attacks. Vi evidently does not consider naming Jinx to be any kind of betrayal, whereas had she named her as Powder and explained what happened in their past, then this would absolutely have been a direct betrayal. Additionally, it is important to remember that Vi may well believe that Jinx is dead at this point. Either Ekko killed her or she died in the explosion, which means naming her to the council will not be putting her in further danger. The outcome Vi wants from all of this is for Silco to be dealt with, which she believes will then allow her to reach Powder and get rid of Jinx forever. But of course, if Jinx died on the bridge, then her goal instead will be revenge against the people who she believes took her sister away from her. Either way, playing ball with the council is a necessity in her achieving her goals. And finally, Vi did not exactly go out of her way to volunteer this information. Jayce directly asked Caitlyn who made the bomb, and so the only other option Vi would have been to lie and say, "I have no idea," which would not have helped in the slightest. Turning over this information does not end up giving her the results that she wanted. Vi is in disbelief that the council wants to negotiate with Silco because she wants Silco destroyed and she knows Silco in a way that the others do not. This also, of course, means that she disagrees with Caitlyn, as Caitlyn objected to Jayce's suggestion that they go in by force. Shortly after the council meeting, Vi seeks out Jayce so as to convince him to help her make Silco pay for his actions. She wants revenge, and Jayce will help her achieve it. As Jayce has at this point had a little chat with Ambessa, their goals align. One other small detail, we are given a reason why Vi would trust Jayce, when one might expect that Vi would want absolutely nothing to do with him.
You're the first person Caitlyn looked for when we made it to topside. You said you were tired of doing nothing. That's the only sensible thing that came out of anyone's mouth tonight.
This is interesting because it shows that Vi still respects and relies upon Caitlyn's judgment, even though Vi and Caitlyn are directly opposed in how to deal with Silco and the Undercity. After they destroy one of Silco's facilities and Jayce accidentally kills a child, Vi chastises Jayce for not being able to deal with looking at one dead kid. This is normal for her, and whilst tragic, it is the status quo for the Undercity. The ignorance of the council allows this to continue, and Vi wants them to keep hitting Silco until he is gone. She goes on to suggest that the kid knew what he was signing up for, and that Jayce did not have a choice. She knows that this kid almost certainly did not know what he was signing up for. She knows Silco, and she knows how he operates, and so the suggestion that this kid died as a result of his own actions is surprisingly callous from Vi. She would of course not apply the same reasoning to her own sister. However, Vi does not believe what she is saying, and she is instead telling Jayce what he needs to hear so that they can finish the job. In spite of her efforts, Jayce returns to Piltover, leaving Vi to pursue Silco on her own. And what is the first thing that she does? Head to the last drop to deal with Sevika, with whom she has unfinished business. For Vi, this is absolutely personal, as the specific reason why she wants to take out Sevika is because Sevika betrayed Vander. The extra benefit of this is that it will also disrupt Silco's operation, but there are more effective ways of hurting Silco than fighting with Sevika in a bar. During the fight, Vi also drinks alcohol in between throwing punches, and the accompanying music definitely indicates that Vi is enjoying getting her revenge. This sequence is absolutely cathartic, and it is extremely effective. After Vi starts to lose, however, the tone shifts, the music stops, and Vi hallucinates Vander giving her advice. This is informed not only by the fact that they used to have these kinds of discussions when she was younger, but also that Vander is the reason why she is currently fighting Sevika. Her recalling Vander's advice, whereupon he tells her that her sister still needs her, gives Vi a second wind. The tone has transitioned in the space of about 30 seconds from upbeat and purely cathartic to emotional and dramatic. And the reason why this does not feel out of place or jarring is because the writing, the animation, and the music all work together to pull this off. And there is no better word for this than beautiful. I'm going to save most of what I have to say regarding the climax of episode 9 for when I discuss Jinx and Silco, so for now I will conclude with my thoughts on Vi. She is an extremely compelling protagonist. She has the most screen time of any character in the show at just over 2 hours, and in this time the writers use her to drive one half of an incredibly effective and emotionally engaging story of the broken bond between two sisters. Much of Vi's story involves her struggle to deal with the consequences of mistakes that she made as a child, and what these mistakes mean for both her sister and the state of the Undercity and Piltover as a whole. She is absolutely one of the best characters in Arcane, and she is a large part of why the show is held in such high regard. Bring on Season 2. The first thing we get for Jinx in Act 3 is when Jayce explains his efforts to dismantle Jinx's bomb that Marcus gave him.
I tried taking it apart and it nearly killed me. Whoever built it knows exactly what they're doing.
This shows us that her bombs have taken on a new meaning. They are not conventional. Jayce, someone who has spent his life building things, was unable to dismantle it safely. And so Jinx's bombs are now symbolic of her pure chaotic nature, which foreshadows Jayce's own inability to deal with Jinx safely. After the climax of Act 2, we see Jinx stapling her leg wound shut. She claims to herself not to remember Caitlyn's name, only to then recall it whilst she staples her leg.
Caitlyn.
This indicates a couple of things that are very small but very important. Firstly, inflicting pain on herself allows Jinx to recall Caitlyn's name, perhaps because it puts her in a similar state of mind to when she first heard the name. Secondly, Jinx associates immense pain with Caitlyn's name. And thirdly, after recalling Caitlyn's name, Jinx punches another staple into her leg and doesn't appear to acknowledge the physical pain that she was feeling moments earlier. This could be interpreted not as her overcoming her fear of pain, but overcoming pain itself. She appears to be more capable and more effective when she is suffering, and so she decides to embrace it. We saw this previously in the arcade, where she deliberately recalled how much she hated Vi before letting rip on the boxing machine. Jinx seems to be more capable when she is very distressed. Keep this in mind for later, as it will become very important. The first thing that Jinx does after sorting out her leg is confront Silco, which is exactly what she would do, because at this point she believes that he has lied to her about Vi. She believes that Silco had Marcus imprison Vi so as to keep the two of them apart, and that therefore her entire relationship with Silco as her adoptive father has been built on his deception and manipulation. Jinx has no idea what to believe anymore, and Silco is no longer the bedrock of her emotional stability. The fact that Vi is alive means that Silco is either a liar or incompetent, and this is a large part of what causes her further descent into madness during Act 3. After Silco defends himself by truthfully stating that Marcus lied to him, Jinx correctly states that Silco is a liar regardless, as he did find out that Vi was back, and yet he still decided to hide this information from Jinx. But Silco's explanation that he was trying to protect Jinx from further emotional pain does appear to be sufficient, at least for now. Jinx disappears after Silco tells her that he needs her to finish the weapon, likely because she knows that she no longer has the gemstone, and she does not want Silco to learn of this. She does not want to disappoint him, and she does not want him to see her as weak, which is an excellent continuation of her motivation and characterization from Act 2. What Jinx does next, however, is slightly problematic, or at least it appears to be, until we dig a little deeper. Jinx waits on the bridge for Vi and Caitlyn. At this point, Jinx can only assume that the Firelights have the gemstone. Therefore, one might expect that Jinx would be attempting to locate the Firelights' hideout. We, the audience, know that Caitlyn intends to return with Ekko to Piltover so as to present the gemstone to the Council, and that therefore they will have to cross the bridge and will likely get caught in Marcus's blockade. Jinx, however, does not know this. Jinx cannot know this. Jinx doesn't know who the Firelights are, she doesn't know that Ekko would potentially be sympathetic to Vi and Caitlyn's cause, and she can't possibly have predicted that after capturing Vi and Caitlyn, the Firelights would then release them and let them waltz back into Piltover. This explanation for Jinx's actions is that she decided to stake out the bridge, figuring that maybe someone at some point might try to take the gemstone to Piltover. This is not broken, but it is weak, because as far as Jinx could possibly be aware, the Firelights have the gemstone, and regardless of whether they killed, imprisoned, or released Vi and Caitlyn, this would not change that fact. There is, however, an alternative read of Jinx's motivation that helps to explain this. In the scene in which she staples her legs shut, Jinx repeats the name Caitlyn and then makes a gun gesture with her hand. This strongly suggests that her intention at this point is to kill Caitlyn so that she can have Vi all to herself, and Silco's instruction to finish weaponizing the gemstone is secondary. If this is the case, then Jinx is not waiting on the bridge to grab the gemstone. She is waiting on the bridge because Caitlyn is an enforcer, and therefore she will presumably return at some point to Piltover. This explanation isn't airtight, however, because, again, as far as Jinx is aware, Vi and Caitlyn have been abducted by the Firelights. And so either way, waiting for Caitlyn or Vi or the gemstone to appear on the bridge seems like a questionable strategy, regardless of what Jinx's actual goal is. However, if we are willing to accept that Jinx trying to locate the Firelights' hideout is not an option, more on that later, then this would likely be her best move. Upon seeing Vi embracing Caitlyn, Jinx becomes emotionally triggered once again. This is another example of a misunderstanding that allows the plot to happen, and because it was thoroughly set up, this does not rely on random chance. This isn't a case of, oh no, Jinx just so happened to be in exactly the wrong place at exactly the wrong time and saw the worst thing she could have possibly seen. Jinx is on the bridge either to recover the gemstone or to dispose of Caitlyn, and Vi embraces Caitlyn because she is saying goodbye, intending at this point to stay behind and reconnect with Jinx. As has happened multiple times in Arcane, Jinx misunderstands what is actually happening, but the writers have made sure that, based on the information Jinx has at this point in time, her perspective is entirely understandable.
It's just a goodbye hug.
She wouldn't do that. Not again.
This further indicates that some part of her does believe that Vi is still her sister. She doesn't say to herself, oh snap, that bitch betrayed me again. She instead tries to justify to herself why Vi might hug Caitlyn. Regardless, she concludes that Vi is in fact a liar when Vi runs to rescue Caitlyn from Marcus. This is a bit odd, and we unfortunately have to lean a little harder on the, well, she's just crazy factor than I would have liked. Jinx can clearly see what is going on with Marcus, Ekko, and Caitlyn. She saw Marcus shoot Ekko, and she can see that he is about to shoot Caitlyn. Vi responding to the gunshot as she does only proves that Vi does not want Caitlyn to die, which Jinx mistakenly extrapolates to Vi is a liar and has replaced me with Caitlyn. Could she believe this, given how paranoid she is? Yes. Could the logistics of this scene have been slightly tweaked so as to make it more reasonable that Jinx would have this perspective? Also yes. Jinx then releases the explodey bugs to kill the enforcers, to ideally kill Caitlyn, and to allow her to recover the gemstone. Rather interestingly, had Jinx done nothing, Marcus would have presumably mustered up the determination to kill Caitlyn himself, and he would have recovered the gemstone and returned it to Silco. This may sound like something Jinx would want, but Jinx would consider this outcome catastrophic, because she is terrified of being seen as weak, and she is still very much controlled by her fear of pain. If Marcus returns the gemstone to Silco, it will make Jinx look weak and incapable. Another factor is that Marcus could potentially change his mind and present the gemstone to the council himself, thus betraying Silco. Alternatively, Jinx didn't even consider Marcus's presence and was simply trying to get the gemstone because she needs it. As she walks onto the bridge, Jinx executes an enforcer and successfully retrieves the gemstone before opening fire on Vi and Caitlyn in a fit of rage. Throughout this sequence, we do have hints that powder still exists in some form. Firstly, when Jinx hums the same song that she sang in the opening of episode 1, which took place on the same bridge. And secondly, when she accepts Ekko's invitation to play their childhood game once more. After being defeated by Ekko, Jinx decides to take them both out, and she detonates one of her bombs. Her psyche has been pushed to the brink due to the repeated misinterpretations of Vi's behavior, her extreme paranoia regarding Caitlyn, and the inconvenient timing of the Firelights cutting their previous conversation short. She has also just come face to face with her childhood friend, who, as it turns out, is the leader of the Firelights. It certainly does appear that everybody wants to be her enemy. Ekko reminds her of the game they used to play, thereby reminding her of who she used to be, and she is then defeated, thereby revealing Jinx's weakness: powder. This, combined with her belief that Vi has replaced her with Caitlyn, all proves to be too much, and so Jinx decides to kill herself, albeit unsuccessfully, which I will get to later. Jinx later abducts Silco, Vi, and Caitlyn and takes them to the cannery where Jinx was born. She tells Vi that although Silco believes he is responsible for creating Jinx by raising her and teaching her to overcome her weaknesses, it was in fact Vi who created Jinx in a brief moment of frustration. Since that day, Jinx has been tormented by the thought of her sister, seeing and hearing her around every street corner. However, Jinx also says that hearing Vi's voice helped her.
You never left. I always heard you. Shadows in the streets, prickles on the back of my neck. Your voice pushing me, picking me up. When all the colors were black, you're the reason I'm still alive.
This is a fascinating addition to what was already great storytelling. Jinx tells Vi that whilst Vi is the reason why she fell in with Silco, Vi abandoning her also allowed Jinx to excel in a way that she never would have had Vi stayed with her. Had Vi not abandoned her, Jinx would also not have had the opportunity to learn anything from Silco, and although Silco's attempts to help Jinx were not what she needed, his lessons did absolutely affect her behavior. Vi also repeatedly encouraged Powder when they were children, one example being in episode 1 when she reassures Powder that her bombs will work one day. Had Vi not believed in Powder, she would have never been able to create the insane bits of tech that she went on to create. Point being, Vi's actions led to the creation of Jinx, and Jinx and Powder are of course the same person, something Vi has until this point been unwilling to accept. This is also why Jinx kept fragments of her past, including the Valdiani from episode 1, Vander's pipe, and Vi's rabbit. She wants to remind herself of how far she has come, and how each of them played a part in making her who she is. Jinx then asks Vi,
Are we still sisters?
Her life has been upended, and she is testing Vi to see if she can be truthful. At this point, Jinx has no idea what is going to happen, and she is working things out in real time. The responses Vi gives will dictate what she does next, which is why this entire elaborate setup is focused specifically on Vi. Jinx believes at this point that Silco planned to betray her, and that he was also full of shit when he explained what happened to Vi. Jinx thinks that Silco is demonstrably untrustworthy, and that he has been lying to her the entire time. This is why she has gagged Silco as well as Caitlyn, because she knows what she thinks of Silco and Caitlyn. There is nothing they can say that will change her mind, which is not at all the case with Vi. Jinx then fucks around with Vi by pretending that she has John Doe'd Caitlyn, that she has chopped off her head and put it on a platter, as this will, of course, provoke an emotional response from Vi. She then asks Vi to kill Caitlyn herself, promising that she can have Powder back if Vi does this. When Vi refuses, she angrily aims her pistol at Caitlyn's head. All of this is with the singular goal of working out what Vi and Caitlyn's relationship actually is, because Jinx does not entirely trust her own interpretation. After everything escalates and Vi attempts to force Jinx to remember who she used to be, Jinx reflexively shoots Silco to prevent him from shooting Vi. Jinx did not have time to think this through, and she is horrified when she realizes what she has just done. Throughout the season, Jinx had started to use her own pain and suffering as a catalyst to make herself more competent and effective. Ultimately, however, reliving her trauma at Vi's urging causes her to reflexively kill her father. Jinx has just done the same thing again. History is repeating itself. At the start of the scene, Jinx asked Vi to choose whether she will sit in the Powder chair or the Jinx chair, but Jinx has now realized that this is not Vi's choice to make. It is her choice, and she is Jinx. Jinx then tells Vi that she hoped Vi would be able to love her like she used to, but that as both of them have changed, this can't happen. Things can never go back to the way they were. In the final minutes of Season 1, Jinx recalls some of Silco's first words to her back in Episode 3.
We will show them all.
And she fires a rocket at Piltover. Silco's final words to her gave her certainty and a degree of peace. She no longer has Silco to comfort her, and she has realized that Vi won't love her in the same way that she used to when they were children. Jinx doesn't care about whatever deal Silco may have had with Piltover. She wants to burn everything to the ground.
They can all burn.
And for the first time in the entire season, Jinx does something that she actually wants to do. The crystals once gave Powder hope that she can actually be useful and help to save Vander, and in so doing prove to Vi that she is capable. As a result of Episode 3, Powder became very dangerous and unpredictable, just like the Hex Crystals. Part of her narrative arc in Acts 2 and 3 is her attempting to deal with this trauma with the hope that she will become more stable, just like the Hextech gemstone. The gemstone functions both as a MacGuffin and as a symbolic representation of Jinx's ties to Silco. He wants her to weaponize the gemstone and herself, and when Jinx is reunited with Vi in episode 6, Jinx lets go of the gemstone and momentarily forgets who she is and what she is doing. Finally, at the end of season 1, Jinx chooses to become a weapon and uses the gemstone to destroy Piltover. The tragedy of Jinx is the backbone of season 1 of Arcane. Her relationships with both Vi and Silco are so incredibly well developed that the subsequent character drama remains the emotional core of the series, despite the fact that Arcane is a very complex story with more than a few complex characters. She appears for just under 90 minutes, and somehow, despite this character archetype being one that may typically lend itself to tropes and cliches, the writers managed to keep the character of Jinx entirely focused and engaging without ever being hammy or laughably exaggerated. Nailing the character of Jinx was the most important thing they needed to get right, as had they fumbled this specific character, then the entire series collapses. And because of how complex of a character she is, the fact that they absolutely nailed Jinx is one of the most impressive things about Arcane. I do have some concerns for what the writers may do with Jinx in season 2, but I will address those at the end of the video. For now, though, Jinx is a masterclass in how to portray deep emotional trauma, unpredictability, psychosis, paranoia, and guilt. Jinx is what happens when the writers truly care about their characters. Silco continues to be a critical component of the story of Arcane in Act 3. A large amount of focus is dedicated to developing Silco's relationship with Jinx. After the events of Act 2, the first seeds of doubt have been sown in Jinx's mind and a rift starts to develop between them. The animators use this exact same shot that we have seen previously, only this time Jinx is absent. For the first time in a long time, Silco needs to administer his medication into his eye without her help, showing that he is more vulnerable and less capable than he has been seen to be thus far. When Jinx does surprise him and shows up, he immediately explains that Marcus lied to him about Vi, and that therefore, Jinx has no reason to be angry at him. This is yet another example of the writers avoiding artificial melodrama, when they could quite easily have had Silco speak in a very vague manner that only serves to build cheap drama in a TV show. The writers of Arcane instead have an exceptionally strong grasp on who their characters are, what they want, what they will say, and why they will say it. The result, which is true of the series as a whole, is that all of the characters feel that much more believable and coherent, rather than appearing as pawns that exist only to be moved around like pieces on a chessboard. Silco claims that he wanted to protect Jinx from the pain of realizing that Vi only came back for the crystal, and of therefore realizing that Vi does not care about her. From Silco's perspective, there may be some truth to this statement, but Silco at this point knows that Vi absolutely intends to rescue her sister.
I'm gonna find her and erase whatever fucked up delusions you put in her head.
Which means that this is a lie, making this the first time that Silco has lied to Jinx, as far as we are aware. As I covered in part 2, there are multiple reasons why Silco would not want Vi to contact Jinx, but the primary reason is that this would destroy the relationship he has built with her. This scene is clear evidence that Silco is willing to be dishonest in order to keep his daughter from leaving him. As I said in part 2, Silco appears to want what's best for Jinx, and Vi is not what's best for Jinx. Silco abuses the trust that Jinx places in him, and when his words clearly affect her emotional state, he appeals to Jinx's trauma at the hands of Vi.
Have you forgotten how she left you? Who found you? Who cared for you? Gave you a home?
Now, this might seem minor, but this is a massive character moment for Silco because it reveals him to be a hypocrite. In the scene by the river, the last scene they shared together, Silco told Jinx that she needed to let Powder die so as to no longer be controlled by her fear of pain. He explained to her that pain can either break you or forge you into something greater. However, Silco has just asked Jinx if she has forgotten what Vi did to her, and in so doing, he is appealing directly to her fear of pain that he had evidently managed to heal, at least partially. He loves Jinx so much and he is so desperate to keep her as his daughter that he will lie to her, emotionally manipulate her, and risk undoing the work he put in to forge her into something greater. Having now weakened Jinx and made her more emotionally vulnerable, he tells her that he needs her to complete the weapon, which also indicates a secondary reason why he is manipulating her. Silco is absolutely a villain, and goddammit, he is a fantastic one. After the fight on the bridge, Silco arrives and is therefore able to save Jinx's life. Because the consequences of Silco being here in time are rather important, it is equally important that his timely arrival does not rely on an illogical or overly convenient sequence of events. Silco did not know that Jinx was on that bridge, and so it may seem as though it is very lucky that he arrived before she died. However, Silco did know that Marcus was on the bridge, and he will have very likely been keeping an eye on things through one of his spies, given the stakes, as at this point Silco needs to ensure that neither Vi, Caitlyn, nor the gemstone returns to Piltover. Given that a gigantic explosion happened not too long ago, I don't doubt that Silco would immediately head to the bridge personally to find out what exactly happened. Silco's reaction to Jinx's apparent death is also contrasted directly with his lack of reaction to Marcus's death. Although he states a couple of times that he appreciates Marcus's usefulness and his willingness to play ball, Silco does not care at all about Marcus on a personal level. To him, Marcus is a tool that will eventually outlive its usefulness, hence his reaction to Marcus's death only really indicating a level of surprise and perhaps mild inconvenience. One of Silco's best moments in the entire season comes when Sevika, Finn, and Rennie enter his office, seemingly with the goal of killing him due to him losing control of the situation with Piltover. I will cover most of this when I talk about Sevika, but for now, let's deal with how Silco handles this and what his actions tell us. As a very brief overview, Sevika, Finn, and Rennie walk in, and the clear implication is that Sevika is going to betray Silco, kill him, and allow Finn to take his place. What ends up happening, however, is that Sevika kills Finn and tells Silco that she would not betray him for a worm like Finn. As the three enter his office, Silco does not respond to Finn's carefully prepared speech because he does not respect Finn whatsoever. Silco previously reminded Finn why they must fight for their independence rather than sit under the heel of Piltover, and he allowed Finn a second chance.
We came from a world where there was never enough to go round. That is why we fight.
Additionally, in this very scene, Silco allows Rennie a second chance.
Get out.
After the death of Rennie's son, Silco said that they all mourn her loss, but they have the solace of knowing that he died fighting for their cause. Silco does not typically allow people to talk to him in the way that Rennie does without making some kind of power play to ensure that they stay in line, which suggests that he does perhaps appear to empathize with Rennie. This is an interesting development that is later flipped on its head. Silco has already been shown to be willing to kill children if it will further his goal. Over the season, Silco has developed a father-daughter relationship of his own, and although Jinx is not really a child anymore, she was still very much a child when Silco spared her and took her in. This suggested that maybe Silco has a degree of empathy, and he of course had very good reasons for sparing Powder, as I went into in a previous video. He then tells Rennie that her son died fighting, and this, combined with the multiple suggestions that Silco is slipping, further suggests that he might not be as ruthless as he was in Act 1. And then, the rug is pulled out from under us.
I would have had your son killed for this, though I suppose we're ahead on that account.
This confirms that even after everything that has happened, specifically his growing bond with Jinx, Silco is still willing to murder children if it furthers his goal. Or, to be more specific, he wants people to think that he is willing to murder children. Silco also appeared to believe that Sevika was actually going to betray him, hence the discussion about loyalty. Silco believed that his time was up, and he accepted it, but wanted to emphasize the importance of loyalty before being stabbed in the back. This may well be because he wanted his three compatriots to remember how important loyalty is if they are going to run things after he is gone. But it is also entirely possible that he was hoping that this monologue would cause Sevika to question her apparent allegiance to Finn, as Silco knows that loyalty is Sevika's core value. Soon afterwards, Silco accepts Jayce's invitation to negotiate. Silco opens the discussion with Jayce by observing that he doesn't have his hammer, making clear from the start that he knows Jayce is the one who attacked his facility. He then hands Jayce his demands, including free trade routes, amnesty, access to the Hex Gates, and sovereignty for the nation of Zorn. Silco demonstrates that he is far more experienced, intelligent, and determined than Jayce, and he immediately puts Jayce on the back foot. The reason why Silco is this bold is because he believes that Jayce has tipped his hand in attacking his Shimmer facility, only to then immediately try and negotiate peace. Silco thinks that Jayce doesn't have the balls to continue attacking Silco's facilities, which is informed by the fact that Silco knows about the death of Rennie's son, which means that Silco has worked out that Jayce will pretty much accept whatever terms he comes up with. The fantastic thing about this is that Silco has every reason to believe this, and he is of course correct, but Jayce still manages to flip the balance of power, surprise Silco, and catch him off guard, which I will get to when I talk about Jayce. Silco agrees to Jayce's terms, specifically that he will discontinue production of Shimmer and that he will return the gemstone. Whether Silco would have actually done this is an open-ended question, but I honestly believe that in return for the nation of Zorn, Silco would do almost anything. If the council gives him sovereignty, he won't need Shimmer to control the populace, and he won't need the gemstone to develop weapons of his own to combat Piltover. I think that there is a strong likelihood that after the fact, Silco or the other Chem Barons may well re-establish production of Shimmer for financial reasons if no other, but I think that for now at least, Silco is being truthful when he agrees to switch everything off so as to get the council's approval. However, Jayce then directly tells Silco to give him Jinx, and in return, Jayce will give him the nation of Zorn. This is fucking brilliant. Silco's entire setup as a character has been that he is singularly driven towards one goal: independence for the Undercity. Throughout the season, he has managed to pressure the Council of Piltover into giving him exactly what he wants. He has won. The problem is that over the course of the season, Silco has developed a close fatherly bond with Jinx. She is his Achilles heel, and the result of this negotiation scene is that Silco is given the ultimate challenge to his values, and this is presented about as clearly as such an internal conflict can possibly be. Will he betray the closest person to him to achieve his lifelong dream? Silco's arc during Season 1 is very similar to Vanda's arc prior to Season 1. Both were fighting for a cause that they believed in, both then realized that family is more important, and both were unwilling to betray or sacrifice the people they loved in service of their cause. Much like Vanda, Silco realizes all too late what he truly values. Even after the events of Episode 3, Silco either built, or allowed to be built, a statue memorializing Vanda, and we know that Silco had a huge amount of respect for Vanda due to how hard he fought. By the time we reach Episode 9, Silco finally understands who Vanda was, and why he did what he did. He understands why his brother betrayed him. In his final scene, when faced with Vi trying to convince Jinx that she is still Powder, once Jinx removes Silco's gag, he immediately tells Vi that Powder's name is Jinx. He believes that he has a unique connection with Jinx, that he is more of a father to her than Vanda ever was, and that Vi will only betray her again. He goes on to tell Jinx that Vi will abandon her as soon as she realizes that Jinx is not Powder anymore. Silco directly plays into one of Jinx's biggest fears, once again going directly against his own urging that she break free from her fear of pain. He explains to Jinx that Jayce offered him everything he wanted, but that he refused because he was unwilling to give her up. It is at this point possible that he is lying so as to manipulate Jinx, which is supported by the fact that, in Episode 7, Silco lied to Jinx about Vi. Silco demonstrably does not have a problem with lying to Jinx in order to save her from experiencing intense emotional pain. When Vi begins to appeal to Powder's trauma to get her sister back and to prevent her from killing Caitlyn, Silco frantically tries to free himself to shut Vi up. Not because Vi and Caitlyn are his enemies, but because Vi was hurting Jinx, and she was going to take her away from him. Silco wants what's best for Jinx, and Vi is not what's best for Jinx. Silco then manages to free himself and tries to shoot Vi with Jinx's pistol. Silco is never shown to use guns. He always either has other people use guns on his behalf, or he uses knives, or he uses some other form of manipulation. The only time where we see Silco use a gun is his final act before he dies. And this shows how Silco is not at all in control of the situation, which is an extreme rarity. Silco is in fact only surprised a couple of times in the show, specifically when Powder blows up the cannery, when Vi and Caitlyn drop the water tower on him, when Sevika opts not to kill him, and when Jayce reveals his reasoning during their parley. As a result of Silco's actions, Jinx reflexively shoots Silco to protect her sister. Silco then repeats his earlier statement that he would never have given Jinx over to the Enforcers. He is absolutely being sincere. As he is dying, he has no reason to lie to his daughter. He loves Jinx and he would never have given her up. In his dying words, Silco tells Jinx not to cry and that she is perfect. He hates to see Jinx in pain and he wants to reassure her that he loves her, despite the fact that she has just killed him. What Jinx needed to fix her was forgiveness, and although this was something Silco couldn't give her, he instead reassures her that she is perfect the way she is. She is his daughter. This is an incredible final scene for one of the best characters out of an exceptionally strong roster. Silco is in fact one of the best villains that I have ever seen, and he is only actually on screen for just over 1 hour. He is incredibly clearly defined whilst being very complex. He has close emotional ties to the central conflict between Vi and Jinx, and his relationship with both Jinx and Vander is fascinating to watch. His final moments reveal to us that he is not as different from Vander as he may have thought. His family is more important to him than anything else, including his own life. Sevika continues to be a deceptively simple evil henchman who has more than a few small details that help to make her a very well-rounded and intriguing character. The first of these details is when she is seemingly uncharacteristically respectful when talking about Jinx with Silco. She explains to Silco that she didn't get along with her own father, and suggests to Silco that Jinx will come back to him when she is ready to. Sevika's intention here is to make sure that Silco is not distracted, and to keep his head in the game for the meeting with the Chem Barons. Importantly, Sevika does not care about Jinx. In Act 2, Sevika explicitly attempted to provoke Jinx so as to get her out of Silco's way. And now that she has seemingly succeeded, she doesn't want Silco to mess everything up and go out looking for her. Very interestingly, Sevika does not angrily tell Silco she's gone, get your head back in the game, which may have been the expected response from a character like Sevika. She instead appears to open up in the most minuscule of ways and implies that she knows how Jinx feels. This is a very interesting character moment as Sevika totally changes her approach, and because the writers and animators do not end the scene with a close-up focusing on Sevika's evil grin while Silco's back is turned, this moment is open for interpretation. Was she telling the truth about her own father? Or was she saying what she needed to say in order to prevent Silco from looking for Jinx? Sevika is shown repeatedly to be extremely good at exploiting people's weaknesses. She takes advantage of Powder being Vi's weakness to stab her in episode 5. She takes advantage of Vi being Jinx's weakness, hoping to provoke a massive overreaction in episode 6. And finally, she does a very similar thing to Finn. She plays into Finn's ego and allows him to think that he has turned her ear. After listening to his monologue, she accepts Finn's offer to light her cigarette, which suggests to the audience that she is considering Finn's offer. In episode 9, when Finn decides the time has come to replace Silco, Sevika accompanies him. The first thing she does upon entering Silco's office is dust off the chair for Finn. A very subtle move, but one with a clear purpose. She wants Finn to believe that she is on his side, and she likely also wants Silco to believe that she is on Finn's side. Although we do not see any follow-up conversation after the events at Silco's facility, this seemingly insignificant action, as well as the nature of their previous conversation, suggests to the audience that Sevika has flipped, and this also functions in-universe to convince Finn that she has her back. Sevika also moves Finn's chair and then positions herself behind Silco, which appears to indicate to both Finn and the audience that Sevika intends to betray Silco. This is an excellent moment of misdirection from the writers because, as I explored in part 2, Sevika's core value appears to be loyalty, but critically, she is loyal to the Undercity, not to any one individual. She will follow whoever she believes will get the job done, as seen in Act 1 when she betrays Vander in favor of Silco, and the writers very deliberately use this strong and clear characterization to suggest that Sevika is now doing exactly the same thing once again. Sevika was, in actuality, in total control of the room from the start. She positioned herself and Finn in such a way that she would be able to kill him in front of Silco. So, if Sevika's intention is to kill Finn, then why bother with this elaborate setup? Why not just kill Finn in an earlier scene? The reason is that Sevika is very smart. This action sends a clear message to everyone else in the room. Rennie will never even think of trying something like this again. But more importantly, Sevika is sending a message to Silco. She is very frustrated with Silco and his continuous enabling of Jinx and her shenanigans, and her ultimate loyalty, as made clear at the end of the scene, is to the Undercity, not Silco. He has to earn her loyalty, and she implies that if Silco continues to falter, and a better prospect were to come along, then she will side with whoever will get the job done. Sevika uses this opportunity to both dispose of Finn, and also to send a clear message to Silco. Get your shit together. After Sevika is defeated by Vi, we see her in Silco's office struggling to light a cigar. Both because she literally just had her robot arm torn off, but also symbolically because she does not have anyone to help her in the way that Silco had Jinx. This scene suggests that Sevika is likely going to play some kind of role in Season 2, but what that role is, I can't even begin to speculate, beyond that she will presumably take Silco's place as the de facto leader of the Undercity. Sevika is again a deceptively simple character who plays a very important role in both Silco's story as well as Vi's, despite barely appearing on screen for half an hour. She fills this role excellently, and she is the perfect example of what a side character should be. She does not draw attention or focus away from those other stories. She is not a caricature. She is a totally believable and clearly defined minor character who serves multiple very important purposes. I have said almost everything I want to say about Marcus in my first 2 videos, but as his final appearances in episode 7, there are a few more things that I want to highlight. A huge amount of what Marcus does relies entirely on the fact that he has a daughter. His unbreakable value is that he will not allow harm to come to her. This is of course a very simple value to have, which I think is why I have seen a few people proclaim that Marcus is a boring or weak character, but I would argue that the simplicity of his core value is contrasted perfectly with the role that he plays in the story of Arcane. He is incredibly clearly defined, and he is pushed further and further to see how far he will go to protect his daughter. Will he lie? Will he arrest the wrong person? Will he kill? Will he murder an innocent? When Marcus catches Caitlyn and Ekko on the bridge, he approaches them alone. He wants to know what Caitlyn knows before taking any action. He also needs to be far enough away from the other enforcers that he can feasibly kill Caitlyn and Ekko, and then presumably claim that one of them pulled a gun on him and be confident that no further questions would be asked. Soon after, he checks over his shoulder to make sure the other enforcers can't hear him, indicating that they are not in on the whole thing, and Marcus presumably didn't pick these specific enforcers due to them being on Silco's payroll. If Marcus shot Ekko in the chest with 10 other enforcers looking over his shoulder, it would be much harder for him to explain his actions. The fact that Marcus shoots Ekko immediately as soon as the gemstone is revealed indicates that he is extremely confident that he can just murder 2 people and cover the whole thing up. He may well have recognized Ekko as a Firelight, given his clothing and the fact that he is carrying a hoverboard, or Marcus may not have recognized him as a Firelight, but merely as someone from the Undercity. Either way, Marcus shoots Ekko before he can react. However, he has a much harder time pulling the trigger on Caitlyn. Unlike killing Ekko, there will absolutely be consequences for killing the daughter of a counselor, and Marcus truly wishes that he was not in the position of having to murder an innocent. After Jinx's bombs go off, Marcus is barely conscious, and he has lost his arm. In his dying breath, he says to Caitlyn,
"Tell my daughter."
And he dies without even being able to finish his sentence. This line of dialogue is incomplete, mirroring the fact that Marcus's story feels incomplete. He dies before being able to become the man that he wanted to be. He had been presented with multiple opportunities to do the right thing, and at the very least to go out on his own terms, but instead he stayed his course. Marcus imagined that he could be a martyr, and that his death could mean something. Instead, his death means very little, and the fact that he failed to kill Caitlyn means that his corruption is revealed to the Council, thus ensuring that he will only be remembered as a traitor. He was tragically never able to fully redeem himself, and his death here precludes him from resolving his character arc, which makes his death that much more sudden. And another interesting layer is that to Caitlyn, this explanation will also have been incomplete. As in, oh cool, you have a daughter, now how exactly does that justify you trying to murder me? Marcus is a fascinating character who fails repeatedly. His death is not dignified, and it does not matter in a narrative sense. Nothing happens directly as a result of Marcus being killed. The deaths of the Enforcers, as a collective, help to motivate Jayce to take action against Silco, but there are no further ramifications beyond this. I already gave some pretty conclusive thoughts on Marcus as a whole in part 2, so I won't repeat myself. Let us continue. Mel spent most of Season 1 manipulating Jayce and molding him in her own image, but by episode 6 she appeared to have developed genuine feelings for him. Despite knowing that what Jayce did to Heimerdinger was the best move for Piltover, she is very aware that this has taken a toll on Jayce. She consoles Jayce and reassures him that what he did was the right move, telling him that everything that he said about Heimerdinger was true. What Mel does not address, however, is that the rest of the Council unanimously turned against Heimerdinger for less noble reasons. This was not Jayce's fault, but this would not have happened if not for Jayce's own actions, and so this is absolutely something that Jayce is going to feel incredibly guilty about. Mel then uses this opportunity to tell Jayce some more details about her backstory, the justification being that Jayce is struggling, and Mel believes her own personal experiences to be relevant to Jayce's current moral predicament. She explains to Jayce that a part of her still loves her family despite the fact that they cast her out. She believes that Heimerdinger will also understand why Jayce did what he did. It may feel like a betrayal now, but if everything goes to plan, Jayce will be able to make further improvements to Piltover beyond Heimerdinger's wildest dreams, not to mention save Viktor's life. This further reinforces that Mel does not hold grudges for very long. She will of course have been instinctively pissed off when her family cast her out, much like she was when Jayce declined to reveal his inventions on Progress Day. However, she does not dwell on this because she presumably sees no purpose in doing so. This is the hand she has been dealt, so it's time to get to work. Next up, we get a joke, and not only are jokes something of a rarity in Arcane, but this joke also appears to be a penis joke.
We'll get through this. In the meantime, try not to lose your nuts.
This is such a tiny moment, but I fucking love it, because once again, the writers of Arcane are doing so much more than a simple testicle joke. Firstly, we have the surface level of haha, she said don't lose your nuts, while giving Jayce the nut that he dropped, and nuts are of course stored in the balls. But more importantly, Mel is telling Jayce to keep his cool. He needs to remain focused, and Mel believes that Jayce is capable of handling the situation that he has found himself in. Additionally, whilst working the forge, Jayce pumped a little too vigorously, perhaps because his mind was elsewhere, and a nut flew off of the machinery. Mel noticing the nut and then giving it back to Jayce therefore indicates that they are far more effective as a team. Jayce needs Mel in order to succeed. Don't lose your nuts is used to mean man up, here is the nut that you dropped, and you can do this, I believe in you, which is a beautiful moment. She later tells Jayce and Viktor,
It's been suggested that they may have found a way to utilize the gemstone. If we are to assume the worst, that would mean they've turned it into a weapon.
This is probably Mel being overcautious, as she can't know this unless she has moles in the Undercity keeping an eye on Silco and Jinx, which is certainly possible.
Well, do we know this for certain?
We can't afford to wait to find out.
And it is only after Viktor realizes where Mel is going with this line of thought that she reveals her intentions.
We should prepare our own countermeasures.
Mel is unwilling to risk the Undercity creating a weapon with the gemstone, and she believes that their only option is to preempt the weaponization of Hextech by weaponizing it first. This is a very interesting revelation, because a large part of Mel's motivation is that she wants to avoid wars, which is informed by her history and her upbringing. However, this does not mean that she is a pacifist. The The thematic link between the inception of hex tech and real-world nuclear weapons is pretty unambiguous, and it is Mel specifically who suggests that hex tech countermeasures be prepared, working on a similar principle to a nuclear deterrent. There are, of course, risks with such a deterrent. Nuclear deterrents rely on both sides being rational and understanding the concept of mutually assured destruction. If Russia were to nuke the USA would nuke Russia, and everyone dies. And so theoretically the Russian authorities would never nuke the USA, although feel free to look up the story of Stanislav Petrov if you ever want to feel very slightly alarmed at how close we came to a nuclear war in 1983. The problem with the idea of a nuclear deterrent is that people are fallible, and with specific regard to Arcane, Jinx is the definition of fallible. The fact that Mel had the upbringing that she had and is as anti-war as she is, and yet still urges Jayce to create a weaponized version of Hextech, shows us two things. Firstly, she places an incredible amount of trust in Jayce to do the right thing and to do it safely, and secondly, she is extremely pragmatic as she has been forced to do this due to the fact that Jinx stole the gemstone. Again, Mel apparently does not know for certain that Jinx has found a way to weaponize it, but she is also not an idiot. She knows that this is very much a possibility, and she would much rather have a deterrent and be proven wrong than not have a deterrent and be proven right. And, quite importantly, Mel does this very shortly after receiving a letter from her mother. We never see exactly what information was contained within this letter, but given the way that they speak to each other when Ambessa arrives, Mel was clearly not following any kind of instruction to create some kind of weapon. What is entirely possible, however, is that Mel recalled some of the lessons that she learned from her mother when she was younger, and given the kind of person Ambessa is, it is not at all unlikely that the idea of making powerful weapons to match your enemies would have been something that Mel was taught at a very young age. Episode 8 gives us a huge amount of information for Mel. We learn that as a child she considered war to be a failure of statecraft. We learn that her mother did not shelter her from violence, and deliberately exposed Mel to war and death so as to harden her and allow her to govern more effectively. Mel's decision to spare the prisoner indicates that she believes that if you are loved by your people, then both you and they will prosper. You will not have to get your hands dirty, and you will not give your people a reason to revolt. In other words, Mel's thought process was that she wanted to take a risk in the short term with the hope that it would pay off in the long term. This is remarkably similar to what Ambessa tries to teach Mel when she executes the prisoner so as to avoid having to kill many people in future. Ambessa teaches Mel to do something difficult in the short term to avoid having to do something even more difficult later. Although Mel rejects this lesson and objects to her mother executing a prisoner, this doesn't mean that she didn't absorb the wisdom of Ambessa's words. We also see that Mel does not react emotionally when presented with the corpses of 11 enforcers, which is very effectively contrasted with Jayce vomiting from shock, and this is clearly informed by how her mother raised her, as seen in the flashback. Mel fundamentally disagrees with the Noxian ideology, and she believes that they resort to warring with each other as their first and only option. Her knowledge and experience with the Noxian way of running things, however, informs her suggestion to Jayce and Viktor that they weaponize Hextech, as she knows that a conflict with the Undercity is one thing, conflict with Noxus is something else entirely. Mel is also shown to be wise to her mother's tricks, as seen when she suspects that Ambessa has started to influence Jayce's behavior at the council meeting. Mel is exceptionally wary of Jayce triggering a war. Mel does not want to undo what Piltover has built, a large part of which she is responsible for, and she doesn't want her mother's perceived eagerness to engage in violence with her enemies to infect her city. She keeps quiet during this entire discussion until Jayce directly suggests that they go in guns blazing, whereupon Mel tells him,
"When do we say enough is enough?"
Jayce, you don't know war.
And she advises the council that war must be their last resort, and suggests that there may still be a diplomatic solution. When Mel confronts her mother due to her suspicions, she demands that she stay away from Jayce. We don't know exactly how much Mel knows at this point. Does she know that Jayce killed a child? Almost certainly not. Does she know that Jayce left Piltover without a word and then came back traumatized? Quite possibly. Does she know that Jayce was acting strangely in the last council meeting? Absolutely. Given that she knows her mother, given that she knows why she is here, and given that Mel is very good at doing the exact kind of manipulation that she suspects her mother is currently doing, Mel is very easily able to work out, quite correctly, that her mother has indeed been influencing Jayce. This is one of a couple of suggestions that Mel is worried that her mother is going to try to replace her. One other example is when local cuisine says Mrs. Medada, and both Mel and Ambessa respond simultaneously, not to mention what I am expecting will happen in Season 2. As a result of her actions in Season 1, Mel is almost certainly dead, although I will elaborate on that a little later in this video. Mel is one of the most complex characters in Arcane, and it can be quite tricky to pin down who she is and what she wants at every given moment, because in something of a rarity for what could broadly be described as a heroic character, Mel is absolutely willing to lie, mislead, and manipulate very powerful people in order to serve her own ends. Her methods are questionable, but what makes Mel a very interesting character is that her goals appear to be a combination of selfish and selfless. She very clearly wants to impress her mother, despite appearing to despise her. This may well be because she wants to prove to her mother, and to herself, that the warmongering of Noxus is not the most effective, nor is it the most prosperous, way to rule a city. Of course, unless the writers pull some clownish subversion in the opening minutes of Season 2, Mel's actions in Season 1 will have inadvertently destroyed Piltover's leadership, thereby serving as a compelling warning against such methods of leadership. Piltover's system of government was demonstrably unable to deal with people like Silco and Jinx, whereas had Silco tried to establish a nation of Zorn in a place like Noxus, Ambessa would have marched into his house on day 1, and would likely have left with his spine in one hand and a beer in the other. Anyway, speaking of Ambessa, it is time we moved on to her. Ambessa Medada is introduced during the flashback sequence at the start of episode 8. This is contextualized as a nightmare Mel has about her mother, which means the writers use the opportunity to explore what Mel thinks of her impending arrival, and establish some kind of expectation for who she is, rather than simply showing us an unconnected flashback with the sole purpose of showing us a conversation that they had when Mel was younger. Notably, we never see Ambessa's face during this nightmare. This is prompted in the narrative by the letter Mel received in the previous episode, and both her reaction to this and the nature of the flashback itself functions as a fantastically intimidating and impactful introduction to Ambessa. And to be honest, her introduction needed to hit pretty hard, because introducing a character as important as Ambessa 8 episodes into a 9-episode season is a bold move, and my guess is that she will become even more important in Season 2. Ambessa is shown to place great value in carrying on traditions, as she tries to make sure Mel learns the same lessons she herself was taught by her own father. We also learn in this flashback that Mel has a brother, Kino, and Ambessa thinks her son is a fool for attempting to be a fox instead of a wolf, before explaining to Mel the importance of being both a fox and a wolf. Or in other words, learning to manipulate and deceive, but also being able to unleash ferocity if required. A fox who is incapable of backing up her words will not last long in a world of wolves, and Ambessa emphasizes the importance of being able to back up political posturing with actions and consequences, as well as being able to know when a problem can be dealt with through words instead of actions. There are, however, references suggesting that Ambessa herself is a wolf, not both a fox and a wolf, as she wanted her children to be. She failed to protect her son, and this was due to her not understanding what was happening and allowing herself to be distracted. She also very unsubtly and very directly asks Mel about Hextech weaponry within minutes of reuniting with her daughter after 10 years of estrangement. This makes her intentions clear to Mel, as Ambessa doesn't appear to even try to hide her reason for being in Piltover. I want to quickly mention what we actually know of Mel's brother, Ambessa's son, Kino. Ambessa claims that Kino crossed the wrong man, and Ambessa believes that she is partly to blame as she was distracted. She skims over this very quickly, and so the impression we get is not at all that Ambessa is racked with guilt over losing her son, which either means that she is emotionally hardened to the point where she gets over the deaths of her children very quickly, or that there is decidedly more to this story. Ambessa believes that there will be a war in Noxus as a result of Kino's death. The mystery man who killed Kino is much more powerful than the Medadas, and this mystery man does not believe that the score is settled. That is all we get in Season 1, but this will no doubt feature heavily in Season 2. Ambessa initially claims that she sent Mel to Piltover because she was too sentimental, she was unable to fit in with the rest of the family, and she thought that sending Mel away to grow herself would allow her to flourish on her own terms. It is revealed later, however, that Ambessa banished Mel because Mel weakened her. Ambessa was unable to govern in the way that she had become accustomed as a wolf, with Mel constantly acting as her shoulder angel and making her question her decisions. By the end of episode 9, however, Ambessa tells Mel to let the war unfold and asks her to return to Noxus to be at her side, indicating that Ambessa no longer believes that Mel is her weakness. She believes that if Mel plays ball and allows Ambessa to take Hextech weaponry back to Noxus, then this means Mel has grown up and accepted certain realities, such as the necessity for using violence not only as a deterrent, but as a preemptive strike.
I would set the world ablaze to protect our family.
And just like that, Ambessa slides in right alongside many other characters that the writers use to explore one of the multiple thematic questions of the show. How far will you go to protect the people you love? Vander thought he could avoid doing anything he didn't want to do, and in the end he was forced to become what Silco wanted him to be, and he died as a result, to protect Vi and Powder. Silco sacrificed both his cause and his life to protect Jinx. He also allowed Singed to carry out extreme and traumatic medical treatment to try to save Jinx. Marcus attempted to kill 2 people, one of whom he knew was completely innocent, to protect his daughter, and he died in the attempt. Jayce's mother, Xymena, embarrassed and tarnished Jayce's character to protect her son from being banished. And Ambessa is willing to start wars with devastating new weaponry in order to protect Mel and the rest of her family. Ambessa is a pretty simple character who I am very much looking forward to seeing more from in Season 2, because if Mel is indeed killed at the end of Season 1, then I would expect that this will drastically affect Ambessa's behavior and may well even serve as a primary driving force for the entire season. She makes one hell of an impression in her 8 minutes of screen time, and I am very much anticipating seeing the wolf kick things up a gear. After the events of Act 2, Jayce is now the de facto head of the council. This is an interesting development, as Heimerdinger was previously the actual head of the council, which means that the council is used to functioning with a head. Why then might Jayce have slotted so comfortably into this role instead of anyone else who has been there for possibly decades? The fact that this happened primarily indicates that the other councillors think Jayce is the best person for the job. He has demonstrated to them that he is capable of making very difficult decisions under high pressure, that he is selfless in terms of his own status, and that he is willing to play nice with the rest of them. This, plus the fact that Piltover is still in potentially rather deep shit as a result of the theft of the gemstone, and the fact that Jayce's investigation into corruption is still ongoing, means that they would all very likely see Jayce as the obvious choice. The fact that Mel describes him as the de facto head of the council, however, means that this is not official. Presumably, this is because none of them, including Jayce, actually want him in that position permanently. Once this mess is cleaned up and things go back to normal, the council will also be able to go back to some degree of normalcy. We see that Jayce has kept Jinx's bomb with him even when he is out hammering. This is an extremely valuable piece of evidence, and he already knows that Jinx was able to break into his workshop. He doesn't want to risk trusting the wrong person, and so he carries the bomb with him, seemingly wherever he goes. He also explains to Mel,
I tried taking it apart and it nearly killed me.
And so this also functions on a symbolic level. Jayce is clearly afraid of the bomb and the person that built it, and so he carries it with him to ensure that he remains focused on his current mission and to make sure that no one else gets their hands on it. Jayce then tells Mel that Caitlyn has disappeared, as he is potentially worried about her after what Marcus told him at the end of Act 2. Jayce clearly has a lot on his plate and is under a huge amount of stress. Viktor is dying, he just betrayed Heimerdinger, he is now the de facto head of the Council of Piltover, Caitlyn has gone missing and is evidently doing something she shouldn't be, and whoever built this bomb currently has one of his Hextech gemstones. All of this hitting Jayce at once proves overwhelming for him, and he was not at all prepared for dealing with any of this, let alone dealing with all of this at the same time. This leads to Jayce lashing out at Viktor after he is forced to allow Viktor through the blockade.
Do you have any idea how this looks? I order a blockade and my own partner violates it.
This does appear to happen in a moment of careless frustration, but I do consider this a clear moment of character growth. Jayce previously did not care what people thought of him, but the events of Act 2 have fundamentally changed how he perceives himself. He knows he needs to not only play the part, but also look the part in order to get what he wants. And Viktor has inadvertently gotten in the way of this. His response to Viktor here further justifies my confusion as to why he did not react angrily to Mel in Act 2 after she steered him away from Viktor and into politics. This was not Mel's fault, and she did not do this to hurt anyone, much like Viktor didn't deliberately go into the Undercity so as to make Jayce look like a corrupt hypocrite. His response to Viktor in this scene indicates that, yeah, he probably should have been more than a little pissed off at Mel, but if you want my full thoughts on that, check out part 2. Anyway, Jayce's justification to Viktor is extremely emotional, but not inaccurate. He did not make this decision lightly, and he did it because, based on the evidence that he had, it was the safest move to make. He goes on to directly state that people from the Undercity are dangerous, forgetting that Viktor is, of course, also from the Undercity. In the council meetings, we see that Jayce now thinks like a politician, not like a scientist, in stark contrast to how he conducted himself earlier in the series, as well as how Viktor conducts himself currently. When Mel suggests that they need to prepare their own countermeasures in case the Undercity weaponizes the gemstone, Viktor's response is, fuck no, that isn't why we created Hextech, whereas Jayce's response is less emotional, less personal, and more pragmatic. He states that if they do so, they will shatter any attempts at peace. He understands that this may be their only option, and he is assessing this option from the perspective of the de facto head of the council, not as the scientist who created Hextech. He goes on to state that Heimerdinger would not have approved of this, further indicating that he respected and understood Heimerdinger's extreme caution with regard to this technology. Even though Heimerdinger is no longer in a position of power, and even though Jayce is the reason for this, Jayce does not want to entirely dispense with Heimerdinger's perspective. And so, Jayce is left with another impossible decision. Turn the technology he invented to help people into a weapon just in case, or hope that Jinx is unable to do anything with the gemstone. In his conversation with Ambessa, Jayce explains that Piltover is used to failing, as being the city of progress and scientific development will inherently mean that for every good idea or invention there are 10, 100, or even 1,000 failures. This is a pretty clear crystallization of Jayce's flaws. He may have been pushed into politics recently by Mel, and he may conduct himself as a politician, but his core values are those of a scientist. And he is in essence trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. He tries to apply his experiences iterating and innovating new technologies to dealing with high-stakes political conflict. Jayce explains this to Ambessa in order to demonstrate to her that he and Piltover are actually capable of resolving the current crisis without her help. But in so doing, he reveals that he is in way over his head. Jayce cannot fail repeatedly when dealing with the Undercity because the stakes are so high that every failure will result in lives being lost. Jayce comes to believe that the Council needs to urgently do something in order to prevent further loss of life. His first priority is to recover the gemstone.
This Jinx has the gemstone.
And he resolves to go into the Undercity and take it by force. When warned of the proliferation of Shimmer and the threat that it poses, he says,
even if we wanted to invade, they have Shimmer.
We have Hextech.
Indicating his newfound willingness to use his technology as a destructive force. He is willing to compromise on his values for what he sees as the greater good, and this is informed both by his previous discussions with Mel, his recent discussion with Ambessa, and him seeing firsthand the dismembered bodies of 11 enforcers. Jayce believes enough is enough. He wants to do exactly what Ambessa tried to teach Mel to do as a child, and he is apparently willing to risk taking a small number of lives now because he considers it preferable to potentially taking many lives later. He fuses his past self with his current self, combining his family's history in forging hammers with his recent developments of Hextech, and he mobilizes the enforcers without the involvement of the Council, thereby abusing his authority for what he considers the greater good. Jayce then personally goes to one of Silco's facilities armed with a big hammer. Yes, of course, I know that this is from the game, but this is a bit silly. Jayce is not a fighter. He is a scientist trying to be a politician. We have not seen him fight at any point in the series, and we have never had any indication that he is even capable of fighting, beyond the fact that he is absolutely shredded. There is, however, a world of difference between being absolutely shredded and knowing how to fight. This is a bit weird because if you eject game knowledge of Jayce, he has been depicted entirely in Arcane as being a nerd. His time is spent coming up with ideas and making things, and more recently, we can add socializing with politicians to that list. There has not been one single suggestion that Jayce spends hours every day training to keep himself looking as ripped as he is, and although when he has his shirt on he is quite clearly bulkier than, say, Viktor, there is a difference between a normal and healthy physique that one can attain simply by not being a diamond-ranked lard goblin and by doing a baseline amount of physical activity, and having an incredibly toned and muscular physique as seen with Jayce. I can accept that a science nerd turned politician could potentially look like this, but I would have found it far easier to accept if we had even a single suggestion in either Acts 1 or 2 that Jayce spends a not insignificant amount of time working out. Maybe because Arcane is so efficiently written, the writers didn't feel the need to insert such a scene, but as I have already observed in Act 2, there is at least one example of a potential scene that could have been included to depict the conflict between Cassandra and Mel regarding her manipulation of Jayce. Maybe have Jayce pumping iron, and then Cassandra bursts in and asks him what the fuck he thinks he is doing with Mel. Anyway, Jayce gets carried away with fighting the Chemtank guards and accidentally kills a child in the process. In this scene, he not only crosses a line, but his actions cause the exact opposite of what he had been trying to accomplish. Had Vi killed this child by accident, it would have still been sad, but it would have been sad for the sole reason that children dying is sad. In Jayce's case, his whole character arc has been that he wants to use his technology to help those in need. This caused him to become a politician, something that he did not want. He has now acted as a vigilante against the wishes of the rest of the council, and has used a weaponized version of the technology he developed specifically to help people, and the end result of this reckless behavior is that a child is killed. Much like the climax of episode 3, this moment is very effective because it is tailor-made to hit Jayce as hard as possible. His actions here will also cause further unrest in the Undercity, as these other kids have just seen a Councillor of Piltover roll up and shoot one of them, which will inevitably lead to an endless cycle of violence, something that Jayce has been desperately trying to avoid. This sequence is depicted initially as his big hero moment, where he finally uses his weapon from the game, accompanied by adrenaline-pumping music. The audience is clearly meant to think that this fight scene is, for lack of a better word, cool as fuck. It is cathartic, and it is absolutely a moment of fan service. We are meant to cheer alongside Jayce as he uses all of his abilities from League of Legends, and for a moment we forget that what he is doing here is more than a little morally questionable, culminating in the shock of him accidentally killing a child, which, thanks to the fantastic presentation, hits us in the same way that it hits Jayce. We were also caught up in the moment, and the writers pulled this off excellently. After realizing what has just happened, it becomes very clear that Jayce has no idea what he is doing. He asks Vi if it is normal to just leave the corpse of a child lying on the ground where he fell, as if this is something that Vi would have experience in by virtue of her being from the Undercity. Given that we have an abundance of other references for Jayce being in way over his head, most notably him vomiting after seeing the bodies of the enforcers on the bridge, I would have preferred, then, that the prior fight scene be handled somewhat differently, as whilst it is very effective in a meta sense to see Jayce doing League of Legends things only to accidentally kill a child in the process, it would have been far more believable for him to rely heavily on his Hex-Tech weapon, and not show us, for example, him effectively dodging, blocking, and countering blows from the Chemtank guards. Rather than depicting Jayce as being on equal footing with Vi, which does not make a huge amount of sense, the writers and animators could have instead shown us visually that Jayce is just some guy who is perhaps elevated to something approximating Vi's level due to this insane technological breakthrough. The unfortunate reality with making these kinds of suggestions on a conceptual level, however, is that Jayce is a champion from League of Legends, and this is the scene where he gets to fight with his hammer, and the fans won't want to see a bumbling, inexperienced nerd lucking his way through the fight. One other potential benefit to tweaking this scene is that it would potentially have shifted the blame from Jayce to Hextech itself. In other words, instead of feeling immense guilt that he just shot a child, Jayce would instead feel heartbroken that his life's work that was intended to save lives has just taken one. Jayce's actions here also inadvertently caused the same catastrophe that prompted his own decisive action initially. After the explosion on the bridge, Jayce decided that enough is enough, and he chose to strike back at Silco. In so doing, he has caused further loss of life, which may well then lead to these other kids further resenting Piltover because a fucking counselor just rolled up and shot one of them. There are no consequences for this in Season 1, but I would not be at all surprised if they do not manifest in Season 2. After returning to Piltover, Jayce reconciles with Viktor. He feels deep regret over how simple things were when he was just a scientist. Everything that has happened to Jayce has felt inevitable, which is part of what makes it such excellent storytelling. His journey has never felt as though the writers made it happen. He may have been pushed and pulled in different directions, but the progression of a naive young scientist who has this amazing invention and wants to change the world, to a reluctant politician who plays the game out of necessity to allow him to change the world, to replacing his mentor and friend so as to prevent his invention from being destroyed, to using his invention as a weapon himself to protect his people, is absolutely a natural progression of events, and it very much feels like there is no other way this could have played out. Jayce's story is a cautionary tale of how even the best intentions can be twisted into bad actions, how incredible technological breakthroughs inherently cannot be controlled or predicted, and how we cannot learn from our mistakes until we have made them. Much like how Skye died because Viktor was careless, this kid died because Jayce was careless, and the two friends agree to destroy their life's work. Importantly, Jayce accepts that he needs to destroy Hextech despite knowing that the Undercity is currently in possession of one of the gemstones, which likely explains why Jayce does not plan to destroy the Hex Core until after he has agreed that Silco will return the gemstone. Jayce invites Silco to parley. This, as well as his actions in attacking the Shimmer facility, were unsanctioned and were not done with the knowledge or approval of the rest of the Council. His reason for approaching Silco is, as Silco correctly deduces, because he does not have the conviction to personally continue his battle against Silco. He is not willing to become as ruthless as his enemy in order to defeat him. However, Jayce also slaps Silco in the balls with a masterstroke of political posturing, which serves as the culmination of his multiple scenes learning from Mel, and more recently, Mel's mother. He tells Silco that he is terrified of what will happen if Piltover starts a war with the Undercity. Piltover will demolish them, and Jayce does not want anyone else to die. As he says, he is giving Silco the opportunity to avoid annihilation. He convinces Silco that they both want the same thing, which would almost certainly have worked if not for the need to arrest Jinx to seal the deal. Jayce understands that he needs Silco out of prison so as to enforce the terms of their agreement, and for this reason, he can't imprison Silco, and for this reason, he needs Jinx to pay for her crimes. Someone has to go down for what happened. The Council needs its pound of flesh. One other fantastic moment of reincorporation of earlier character information is that Jayce, once again, does not haggle.
The boy didn't even haggle.
He paid in gold and didn't even haggle.
Jayce declining or forgetting to haggle is one of the first things he does, and it is one of the last things he does. Nothing in Arcane is used once. Everything has a purpose, and there are so many tiny details like this that are reused and reincorporated throughout the series that I could probably make these videos double the length that they already are and still not catch them all. In his final scene, Jayce presents himself openly to the Council. He has learned that he is not fit to govern the Undercity, and he claims that as the rest of the Council is also unfit, he has offered Silco sovereignty, believing that this is genuinely what is best for the people of the Undercity. The writers of Arcane build, stretch, and break Jayce's moral compass. Through the various other characters, the writers guide him, challenge him, mislead him, and punish him. Jayce could very easily have been a wet sock of a character who just does what everyone else says because he is a spineless, empty, and unintelligent parody of a real person, but the writers managed to pull this off expertly by being crystal clear as to what Jayce values at each point in the story. And when these values change, the writers thoroughly explore why this happens. Jayce is a character who I found somewhat underwhelming when compared to the other main characters, but making these videos has definitely helped me to appreciate him a bit more. I do have thoughts on what I expect from Jayce in Season 2, but I will get to those a little bit later. Viktor's story picks up right where we left off at the end of Act 2. He has visited his old friend, revealed to be Singed, after Jayce told him to do whatever he needs to do, and he is given a variant of Shimmer to allow him to survive any transmutation he chooses to undergo. As a result of Viktor going into the Undercity to visit Singed, he inadvertently ends up on the wrong side of Jayce's newly erected blockade, and upon being berated by Jayce for making him look bad, Viktor lies to Jayce by telling him that Singed was unable to help. This would mark the first time that Viktor has been dishonest with Jayce, and this is not something that Viktor would ever do unless given proper justification. Not only did Jayce disapprove of Viktor going into the Undercity on account of it being a dangerous place, but Jayce also totally forgot that Viktor was from the Undercity, and he didn't even consider that perhaps Viktor's old friend might also be someone from the Undercity. Moments like this are where Arcane shines, because of how natural they feel, especially when compared to the usual contrived bullshit we are regularly fed. The outcome of this scene is that Jayce and Viktor are both pissed off with each other, which drives them further apart than they were in Act 2 due to Jayce becoming a politician, and where a lesser show may well have just had Jayce be angry that Viktor made him look like a hypocrite, this scene instead layers in multiple factors that indicate to Viktor that Jayce's views are no longer aligned with his own. Singed told Viktor,
"I must warn you, if you take this path, they will despise you."
And soon afterwards, Jayce insulted Viktor because he was being careless. Jayce is fearful of the Undercity for good reason, forgetting that his best friend and colleague is from the Undercity. He has this entire conversation about how dangerous a place it is, not recalling that he is talking about Viktor's home until Viktor reminds him. And, rather critically, it is totally in character and reasonable for Jayce to say and do all of this. As I have already been into, Jayce is thoroughly out of his comfort zone. He is being an asshole to Viktor for entirely valid and understandable reasons, which is why this conflict does not feel contrived. It does not feel melodramatic, and it does not feel like the writers decided, and then Jayce was a prick because we need drama. As a result of Singed's warning, and Jayce's apparent shift in values and priorities, Viktor experiments extensively using his own body, the hex core and the shimmer given to him by Singed. He carves runes into his leg brace and his own flesh, turning himself into a vessel for magic. This is the culmination of his experimentation. He has become more and more extreme, and he has only been able to do this because Jayce has not been present. This fantastically mirrors what happened to them in Act 2. They both drifted apart, and so neither one was able to keep the other in check, which ultimately leads to them agreeing to destroy their life's work. However, before doing so, we get a fantastically cathartic, emotional sledgehammer of a scene where we see that as a result of his experimentation, Viktor can finally walk unaided, having been crippled since he was a child. This is an important scene, because until this point we have been seeing Viktor doing very questionable things, and so showing the audience the benefits of his experimentation helps make his actions understandable and explicable, and also helps to ensure that Viktor remains sympathetic throughout. In a beautiful moment of visual symmetry, we see that Viktor is now outrunning full-sized boats, when he previously couldn't even keep up with his toy boat. He appears to have succeeded. This scene is also placed immediately before Skye is atomized by the hex core, which means that the writers very effectively give us and Viktor an emotional high by depicting the success of his experimentation, moments before showing us the incredible cost. Skye's letter describes how she watched Viktor work tirelessly to make the world a better place. This compounds Viktor's guilt, because although his goal when he started was absolutely to make the world a better place, his recent actions and obsessions have been strictly related to prolonging his own life. Yes, his original intention here was presumably to fix whatever illness he has so that he can go on to make the world a better place, but regardless, his actions have been singularly focused on saving himself, seemingly at all costs. He has crossed lines that should not have been crossed, and Skye being killed as a direct result forces Viktor to reassess what he is doing and question whether he is worth saving. He attempts to destroy the Hex Core, but appears unable to do so. There are a couple of possible explanations for this. At first glance, it appears that Viktor simply changed his mind about whether or not to destroy it, but he later tells Jayce that Jayce must himself destroy it, as he cannot, which is either literal, due to his having melded himself with the Hex Core, or Viktor is simply saying that he can't bring himself to destroy this amazing technology. Moments later, the Hex Core zaps Viktor remotely and he falls to the ground. This is likely as a result of him melding his own biological matter with the Hex Core and using it to augment his body, and it appears as though the Hex Core itself is becoming conscious and capable of defending itself. If this is the case, then it is not impossible to suggest that it has already influenced Viktor's actions, in that it made his brain stop him from destroying it seconds earlier. Additionally, if we go even further, it could be that the Hex Core has been influencing Viktor in a very real sense to continue his experimentation, as this experimentation will result in the Hex Core being able to take physical form and combine itself with Viktor. One other possibility here is that as Skye was moments earlier disintegrated and seemingly sucked into the Hex Core, her consciousness may have been absorbed by it, and she zapped Viktor as an attempt to communicate with him. This will presumably be made somewhat clearer in Season 2. After Skye's death, Viktor realizes that he is not willing to continue his research, even though this may well lead to his own death. Another moment of narrative symmetry, as the exact same thing happened to Jayce soon afterwards. After scattering Skye's ashes, Viktor attempts to kill himself in the same manner as Jayce in Episode 2, only this time Jayce rescues him.
Am I interrupting?
It is sometimes difficult for me to gush about how good something is without sounding repetitive, but holy tit nuggets, this is incredible. Jayce and Viktor's friendship began when Viktor brought Jayce back from the brink. They gradually drifted apart throughout the season, each learning their limits and paying the price for their recklessness, only for Jayce to then save Viktor before they agree to destroy their research. This is fucking beautiful. Viktor then suggests to Jayce that he cannot self-terminate, and so he needs Jayce to be the one to destroy the Hex Core. What this will mean for Viktor is unknown, but given that they quite clearly have some kind of connection, it is entirely possible that destroying the Hex Core will also destroy Viktor. When Jayce questions how they will deal with Viktor's illness if the Hex Core is destroyed, Viktor does not answer, and instead makes Jayce promise that he will destroy it. Viktor has therefore concluded that he cannot continue trying to prolong his own life. Viktor's story in Arcane is a deeply emotional one. Like most characters, he is thoroughly understandable and sympathetic even when he makes questionable decisions that lead to terrible outcomes. His story is closely interwoven with Jayce's, both narratively and thematically, and, like Jayce, in the pursuit of great, he failed to do good. I was amazed when I realized that Viktor only has 55 minutes of screen time, because it truly feels like we have seen this man grow, fade, and accept his fate over easily double that length of time. Viktor is one of the most sympathetic characters in the show, and although, like all League of Legends players, I have a pretty good idea of where Viktor's story will go, I can't wait to see how we get there. I haven't talked about Singed yet in either of my previous videos because he is a very minor character, so I decided to wait and do him all in one go. Singed's values, personality, and motives are very, very simple. He seems to only care about making evil magic goo. He is obsessed with genetic mutation, and we learn that he used to work with Heimerdinger. He sacrificed his love and legacy in the name of progress. Presumably, this is in relation to the daughter that he mentions, and he implies that Heimerdinger was more concerned with his own love of Piltover and his personal legacy than he was with progress. Singed is impressed by Viktor, even as a child, and he appears to want to pass his wisdom down to him. Now, regarding the mutation must survive, I don't believe that Singed was manipulating Viktor when he said this. Singed didn't actually need Viktor's help, as he could have acquired the purple flowers himself. However, as he clearly sees a connection between himself and Viktor, he decides to take him in so that they can work on his project together. Singed was not tricking Viktor into doing something horrible and amoral. In this way, Singed's relationship with Viktor can be likened to Silco's relationship with Jinx. Both Singed and Silco project their own experiences onto Viktor and Jinx. They both think that what their respective child needs to do is exactly what they did, and in the case of Singed and Viktor, Singed acknowledges that, like him, Viktor is lonely but has a gifted mind. I think that when Viktor agreed to help, Singed genuinely thought Viktor understood what this was all about. Where Viktor was innocently interested in saving Rio, Singed understood that Viktor wanted to save the mutation. After Viktor visits Singed in episode 7 as an adult, Singed is very interested in what Viktor has just told him regarding the Hex Core, and he wants to see what will happen next. Singed may also want to return the favor Viktor did him by helping Rio. Singed may also now believe that Viktor is ideologically aligned with him when it comes to furthering scientific development at all costs, and not letting pesky inconvenient things like having a moral compass get in the way. He suggests that Viktor needs to try using the Hex Core on something other than plants, which, given what he did to Rio, is exactly the kind of thing Singed would want Viktor to do. Singed is definitely curious about what the Hex Core is and what it will lead to, but I don't think he cares at all if Viktor dies through heeding his advice. Singed would likely be like, oh, well, a shame that the mutation did not survive. However, he does warn Viktor.
I must warn you, if you take this path, they will despise you.
Which could indicate that he only wants Viktor to do this if he is certain. He forewarns Viktor of some of the potential consequences that he himself has experienced, which if he was exclusively interested in watching the fireworks, he would have no reason to do. I don't believe that Singed cares what Viktor wants, but I do think that he knows that the mutation will only survive if Viktor is fully committed. And I think that he respects Viktor enough to warn him of the consequences of what he is about to do.
Will it work on plants?
You aren't here about the plants.
Singed knows from the start exactly why Viktor is here. Viktor also knows why he is here. Singed wants Viktor to change his nature, literally and metaphorically. Or, in other words, Viktor needs to stop wasting time making sure his experiments are safe. Playing around with plants is not going to get him the results he needs. Singed doesn't seem to have any kind of allegiance or loyalty to anything other than making sure his experiments are successful. Working for Silco in Act 1 resulted in him getting blown up, and yet he evidently continued to work for Silco after the fact, rebuilding the stockpiles of shimmer after the supply was destroyed. Additionally, Singed agreed to help Viktor as an adult, even though the last time they saw each other, Viktor left horrified by what Singed was doing. Additionally, he sedates Silco when he heals Jinx to make sure that Silco does not get in his way. This is because he is about to do some crazy science shit to her, and in order to have any hope of saving her, he is going to have to dial things up to 11, and therefore risk killing her in the process, which also helps to establish just how intense Singed's medical treatment is going to be. This is something that the writers absolutely needed to do, because Jinx was basically dead after the fight on the bridge, and so in order to have her come back, seemingly bigger, badder, and better than ever, the writers needed to have some pretty insane shit happen to her for this to be explicable. Singed is absolutely one of the simpler characters in Arcane, but as I'm going to discuss momentarily, simple and bad are two very different things. Singed is used to fulfill multiple narrative purposes, including helping Viktor, creating shimmer, and doing something that will almost certainly happen in Season 2. There is nothing wrong with him, but there is also nowhere near enough to his characterization for me to call him great. There are a whole bunch of other minor characters who I've not mentioned yet, including the Counselors, the Chem Barons, Skye, and a handful of others. All of these characters are very simple, and so I've decided to group them together to have a discussion about how Arcane uses simple characters and why they do not detract from the show. When it comes to characterization, much like general storytelling, the more complex you go, the more opportunities you have to fuck things up. It is pretty easy to write a very simple character and have them behave consistently, because you don't have to address very many moving parts. Similarly, if your story is extremely simple, it will be easier to make it airtight and to adhere to cause and effect. However, once you start dialing up the complexity, your skills as a writer will become apparent. That is why, in a show like Rings of Power that is generally very poor in terms of, well, everything, but specifically when it comes to characters, the best characters in the show are the ones who have a very short amount of screen time. There are fewer opportunities for mistakes. In the case of Arcane, which excels in the character department, there are nonetheless multiple characters who are extremely simplistic. If you were to insert a character like Skye, for example, into Rings of Power Season 3, maybe a woman who fancies Elendil, and then through Elendil's negligence he accidentally gets her killed because the sea is always right, would this hypothetical version of Skye be of the same quality as Arcane's version of Skye?
Absolutely fucking not.
Skye in Arcane functions entirely because she is directly connected to parts of the story that are exceptionally well written. If Viktor's entire character arc in Season 1 made as much sense as Elendil's character arc in Rings of Power, then I would very likely be telling you how Skye is a trash-tier character who we know nothing about and who served no purpose within the story. What prevents all of these very simple characters from detracting from the overall quality of the story is that they are firstly coherent and consistent, secondly they are all used very deliberately and effectively, and thirdly, they usually tie in to the major dramatic beats of the show that are primarily driven by the more central and more complex characters. Ren, Marcus's daughter, is only important because she is a motivation for Marcus. The Chem Barons are only important because of how they relate to Silco and, to a lesser extent, Sevika. Skye is only important because of what she means to Viktor. Does Arcane improve as a show if you develop Ren, the Chem Barons, and Skye further as characters? Theoretically, yes. But the issue with this proposal is that Arcane, of course, has a limited amount of time in which to tell its story, and you can always say, well, I want more development of this minor character, because provided that the development is good in its own right, it will then theoretically make the character stronger, and in the case of Skye and Finn, make their deaths more impactful. Simple characters are a problem, however, if their simplicity gets in the way of the audience understanding what has happened. It is not a problem for Marcus's daughter Ren to be an extremely simple character, because her purpose and function is extremely clear. For an example of when this does matter, however, we need look no further than Alfred in The Hobbit, because his offensive level of simplicity makes the setting less believable, and as his purpose within the story is anything but clear, and he almost exclusively distracts from the other far more important characters and plot moments. If we look at something like Rebel Moon, which I consider the pinnacle of failure in almost every department, but specifically in terms of characterization, we have a roster of interchangeable, underdeveloped, and painfully simplistic characters who are presented as the main characters of the story, and they are treated as though they are far more complex than they actually are. So moving on to specific characters in Arcane. Mel's assistant Elora doesn't seem to serve any kind of purpose beyond assistant, and quite literally all of her dialogue is expository in nature. However, Mel having an assistant is not a problem in and of itself, and so Elora doesn't need to be any more than she is for the story to function on the exceptional level that it does. Similarly, Caitlyn's father Tobias does absolutely nothing, and simply appears in the background in a handful of scenes. He serves no purpose within the plot, and he does not affect anything that happens, but again, Caitlyn having a dad is of course not a problem, and he does not need to be characterized to exist within the show. Jayce's mother Xymena serves one single purpose, and that is to motivate Jayce through their experience with magic, as well as her denouncing him to try and save him from banishment. This propels Jayce's story, and she does not need to do anything else. Locke, Silco's henchman, functions largely as a plot device in that his narrative purpose within the story is to cause Caitlyn to head to Stillwater Hold, whereupon she encounters Vi, and Locke is not seen or mentioned again. His characterization starts and ends at large henchman. Counselor Hoskell is unintelligent and doesn't seem to care about much beyond making money. He is, broadly, very similar to Alfred and the Master from the Hobbit movies, but as Hoskell is one of many counselors, and as he is not individually important in driving the plot, or the arcs of Jayce or Mel, his simplicity is not a detriment, whereas Alfred and the Master's simplicity is, honestly, just fucking painful. Counselor Salo is primarily concerned with ass-kissing to gain status. He is also unintelligent, and like many of the counselors, he is totally ignorant of how the Undercity functions. Counselors Bulbuck and Shula each have about 4 lines of dialogue in the entire season. Bulwark seems logical and robot-y, and Shula seems to be a traditionalist, but that's about it. The 4 extra counselors don't each serve much of a purpose beyond Bulwark's line about his race being destroyed by magic, and Hoskell being manipulated by Mel with a children's toy, but collectively they are of course very important to the story. Shula perhaps seems to be the one with the least purpose within the show. All of her lines could have been delivered by someone else, but she also doesn't detract because, again, she is one of many counselors who collectively are very important. Most of what I have to say about the Chem Barons relates specifically to Finn, but let's quickly deal with the other 4. Cross is really old and doesn't talk. Margot is a goth and doesn't talk. Smeech is a robot cocaine rat and doesn't talk. These 3 are not characters, and they only function as one of the Chem Barons. Rennie has a tiny bit more to her, as it is her son who is killed by Jayce. Rennie wants Silco to get revenge for her son's death, but the fact that she allowed or wanted her son to work in one of Silco's facilities indicates that she did not particularly care for his safety. The writers use this character to pressure Silco, very justifiably, into seeing how much trouble Jinx has caused. Silco is clearly not receptive to the multiple times Sevika has talked to him about Jinx, and so the writers dial things up even further by having a grieving mother do the same. And when Silco still does not acknowledge how much of a problem Jinx has become, this then leads to the Chem Barons deciding to overthrow him. Which brings us to Finn. Finn seems to take the lead in the meeting. He is the youngest and evidently the most ambitious. He wears his wealth on his sleeve and, as it turns out, on his face. He dresses to intimidate, and he looks like an impractical but admittedly expensive car, whilst sounding like a nervous 13-year-old.
You're a scary lady.
He is also covered in tattoos, and I am reminded of a line from Game of Thrones.
Any man who must say, "I am the king," is no true king.
Finn is very clearly overcompensating. He appears to be financially minded rather than ideologically minded, as is the case with Silco, as he complains to Silco that due to the border being closed, the Chem Barons are losing money as a result of Silco's dreams of rebellion. Finn then reveals that he knows about the gemstone, which seems odd.
We should cut a deal and give back the gemstone.
Why on earth would Silco ever tell Finn that Jinx has a Hextech gemstone? Well, given that the Chem Barons appear to meet semi-regularly, they will absolutely have met off-screen after Jinx blew up the Enforcers in Episode 4. Given their reaction to the blockade, they would have been absolutely fucking furious with Silco, as Jinx is his responsibility, and so Silco could potentially have revealed the fruits of Jinx's mayhem so as to justify his actions. He almost certainly will not have told them that Jinx did this of her own accord, as that would have made him look weak, and it would have made Jinx look like an uncontrollable maniac, and Silco would likely have told them that this was all part of some kind of plan. This is further supported when Finn says,
"Rumor is you dogs are for leash,"
which he wouldn't say if they already knew that Jinx was off her leash. None of this is in the show. However, all of this can be reasonably drawn from what is in the show. Instead of something ceasing to exist the moment that the camera is pointing the other way, as is the case in Rings of Power, Arcane is so detailed that it absolutely feels like a continuous setting rather than like a TV show created for our entertainment. Anyway, Finn attempts to bait Silco and asks why they should trust him to handle Piltover if he can't even handle Jinx. Finn has correctly identified Silco's weakness, and he tries to use it against him. The fact that Jinx is Silco's weakness is evidently so clear that even someone as astute as Finn is able to notice. However, where Sevika is very much able to exploit people's weaknesses, as she does with Vi and Jinx in Act 2, and as she will go on to do with Finn in Act 3, Finn fails because he is not anywhere near as intelligent, nor is he as committed as his opponent. He is the opposite of Sevika in this way, which is partly why it is very fitting when Sevika kills him in front of Silco. Finn is, like all of the Chem Barons, a very simple character. The reason why it might feel as though Finn detracts from the show in a way that fucking Smeech does not is because Finn is prevalent enough in Act 3 to reveal that he is very much a one-dimensional character. However, apologies for stating the obvious, Arcane is not Finn's story. And I think Finn exemplifies why one-note characters in a good story are exponentially better than one-note characters in a bad story. Aside from a small amount of world building, Finn is used solely to affect the stories and arcs of the other characters. Characters like Finn are not plot devices, they are instead what I would call character devices. To briefly elaborate on this, a plot device is when a writer adds a thingy into the story in order to progress the plot, or in some cases, to initiate the plot. When done well, plot devices are naturally integrated into the setting, as with the One Ring in The Lord of the Rings, where the plot can be reductively summarized as, oh no, whatever shall we do with this plot device? When done poorly, as with the metric arse ton of quantum bullshit that we received in the various Star Wars sequels, they feel tacked on, as if the writers couldn't think of a way to get the characters from A to B, and so they added a magic MacGuffin that takes them from A to B. Characters can also function as plot devices. One example would be Waldreg in Rings of Power, who exists solely to take the physical plot device and use it for evil. Waldreg's characterization is the way that it is so that the plot can happen, and nothing more. The difference between Waldreg and characters like Finn in Arcane, for example, is that Finn is not characterized so as to further the plot. He is characterized so as to further the individual narratives of the characters he interacts with. In the case of Finn, he is used to facilitate character development for both Silco and Sevika. The writers are able to explore and challenge Silco and Sevika through the character of Finn, and so his simplicity is never a detriment, because he is clearly targeted and purposeful, and the writers do not waste a second of our time. To finish up this discussion, we have one more very minor but very important character, Jayce and Viktor's assistant, Skye. I will quickly go through what we know about Skye as a person, which, as you might expect, is not much. She admires Viktor, she worries about his health, and she fancies him. That is about as bare-bones characterization as you can possibly get, which would make Skye easily the best character in Rebel Moon, but in Arcane, the writers use this incredibly simple character both deliberately and effectively. Part of the point is that we don't know Skye, much like Viktor doesn't. Viktor, in fact, didn't even know Skye well enough to know where she might like her ashes to be scattered. The location he chooses is somewhere Viktor frequently goes. This is where Heimerdinger first met him, and this is where Heimerdinger finds Viktor after he learns of his failing health. Point being, Viktor takes Skye to somewhere he likes to be, because he knows almost nothing about her. We, the audience, are peripherally aware of her presence, as she is frequently shown in the background, hence her having a surprising 6 minutes of screen time. And she has as much characterization as she needs for the Viktor payoff to be emotionally effective. The focus of that scene is on Viktor's emotional turmoil. The point was that Viktor never got to know Skye. This was wasted potential, and he inadvertently threw away what could have been. Had we gotten a 6-part Skye and Arcane story spin-off, then this scene may well have hit harder for the audience, but it would not have changed Viktor's reaction, which is the entire point of the scene. For this reason, I am not at all confident that extending the overall runtime of Season 1 by, say, 30 minutes, and dedicating this additional time to developing Skye further, would have actually improved the series as a whole. As Skye only serves one single purpose within Arcane, it is appropriate that the writers spend as little time on her as possible, whilst still allowing her to serve her purpose. Skye's personality and function within the story serves only as an extension of Viktor's story, and she exclusively interacts with him. Her death is tragic because Viktor's reckless pursuit of dangerous technology resulted in an innocent woman being killed, and so the function Skye serves is essentially that, innocent woman. Therefore, I can't say that Skye is a bad character because she honestly isn't, but this is almost entirely due to the impact that she has upon Viktor's arc. To summarize, there are no characters in Arcane that actively detract from the story. There is no weak link. Whilst there are absolutely characters who are simply there, they are not given enough development to open them up to being either pointless or a waste of time. It is therefore not a problem at all with Arcane that some of its characters are barely characterized, because the show is very much focused on the ones that matter. We don't need to know what Elora's love life is like, because Elora is merely an incidental character within the story of Arcane. She is Mel's assistant because Mel would have an assistant. And so, if anything, keeping Elora as a background presence is vastly preferable to taking up precious minutes exploring her, only for her to not amount to anything. The world building of Arcane is largely very good, but now that we are at the end of Season 1, I have a couple of points that I want to highlight. Let's start with the Firelights and their hideout. Episode 7 opens with what is essentially a music video for a hip-hop song, accompanied by visuals of spray-painted graffiti, bullets, people lifting weights, hitting things with bats, punching things, and jumping over things on their hoverboards. This shot here shows bullet casings accompanied by a mask, the mask being the one worn by the girl in episode 4 that was gunned down by Jinx. This imagery is clearly intended to hammer home how violent their lives are and how quickly things can go badly wrong. This is a lifestyle they have chosen, because the alternative would be to either pursue a life of crime under one of the other crime lords, to abandon their home, or to become nihilistic delinquents with no purpose. The lyrics make very clear that these people despise politicians because they believe them to be corrupt and useless, and because the politicians ignore the very obvious problems in the Undercity. The Firelights are here to fix that. They are here to equalize the inequality because they consider it unfair that bad things happen to them when they have never had the opportunity to succeed in any other way due to them being from the Undercity. This music video style opener serves as the audience's first introduction to the Firelights, as prior to this, all we know is that they are a criminal faction that occasionally gets in Silco's way, that their leader seems to prefer not to use lethal force on his opponents, and that at the end of Act 2 they abducted Vi, Caitlyn, and the Gemstone, but left Jinx alive. The vibe that this introduction is very clearly going for is that of a group of disenfranchised youths who think that life has it in for them. So they have decided to spray paint everything, lift weights while wearing edgy masks, and kick down your door if they think you are working for the man. In the context of Arcane and the world that has been established, they are absolutely justified in their beliefs, and so their subsequent actions are somewhat more justifiable than they would otherwise be. It could be that I personally heavily dislike this kind of music,
Green from the poor, they only here to score. I do it for the underground kings that don't need.
And so that could absolutely be coloring my opinion here, but this music video segment, to me, gives the impression that the Firelights are trying way too hard to be intimidating. This is clearly not a literal music video. We are not meant to infer that the Firelights all got a camera and started posing and acting like gangsters, desperate to be taken seriously. This is instead a heavily stylized 30-second intro to an episode of a TV show. This is simply a combination of imagery and sound that has the goal of establishing a general vibe for who the Firelights are before we are dropped back into the story. Coming out of Act 2, there are a few very big questions that need to be answered. Why did they abduct Caitlyn and Vi? Why did they take the gemstone? And why did they not do anything to Jinx? In the attack on the airship, the Firelights use a form of temporary stun grenade, combined with the element of surprise, to incapacitate Silco's men while they burn his shimmer. Unfortunately, this is not a strategy they will use in future. One of them attempts to throw a single stun grenade at Jinx during the fight at the end of Act 2, but this doesn't work because Jinx shoots the grenade, and they do not attempt this a second time. Their strategy here instead relies entirely on speed and agility rather than using any kind of sneak attack. This indicates that the Firelights are not particularly organized or disciplined, despite the fact that Ekko is present on both occasions. The Firelights should know exactly what they are going into. Ekko knows who Vi is, and he also witnessed Jinx using her minigun on the airship, which means it may have been far more effective to ambush them. The Firelights are also shown very clearly to be willing to kill. Ekko evidently did not instruct his men beforehand to capture Vi and Caitlyn alive, as one of his men attempts to execute Vi before Ekko interrupts him. They do not attempt to execute Caitlyn, however, likely because she is an enforcer, and they don't want to attract that kind of heat. Ekko may potentially know that Marcus and Silco are setting him up, and he perhaps intends to return Caitlyn to Piltover as a show of good faith. As for why they retrieved the gemstone, this was a case of, oh cool, that looks valuable, and Caitlyn was trying to escape with it, so I guess I'll grab it just in case. As for why they left without killing Jinx, this is likely due to the fact that they didn't need to. Ekko additionally does not want to kill the girl who used to be his friend, and he would absolutely not want to capture her and bring her to the hideout due to the obvious risks involved. The Firelights' hideout itself I find borderline unbelievable. No one seems to know about this place. It is one thing to tell me that there are underground tunnels that are difficult to traverse, and therefore that very few people explore them. It is another thing to tell me that a gigantic open-air cylindrical structure such as this exists, and no one knows what is inside. And come to think of it, it is another thing again to tell me that the Firelights routinely make a lot of noise and yell that they are the Firelights whenever someone comes home. The reason this matters is because the Council and Silco are trying to bring down the Firelights, and yet I do not believe that such a place could remain hidden. Their hideout is depicted almost as a heavenly Garden of Eden type utopia built around a tree. Ekko states that the reason he chose this location is because he likes the tree, which means the tree has been here for a long time. This makes sense because this tree is absolutely fucking gigantic, which means it quite simply has to be older than Piltover, and it was not planted here after the city was founded. Symbolically, this works. Ekko literally tells Vi,
"If a single seed can make it down here, so could we."
Which is a great representation of the plight of the average citizen living in the Undercity. However, logistically, this strains believability. The only reason why I am at all able to accept that Silco did not know about this place is because of how vague Arcane is with its geography. We don't know where this haven is in the Undercity. We don't know how they access it, if they have to go through a series of tunnels, or if they take a left at Benzo's and go down a pothole. Given the fact that this appears to be the only tree left in the Undercity, what probably happened was that the people who built the Undercity demolished all of the other trees, but decided to keep this one, and so built a gigantic cylindrical structure to enclose it. For some reason, everyone then forgot that this place existed, and Ekko found it and decided to turn it into his hideout. Ekko tells Vi that they built the hideout during his lifespan, which presumably refers to the structures attached to the tree itself and the various houses below, as he can't really be referring to the gigantic walls that enclose the tree from the rest of the Undercity. I think this is far more plausible because if this tree being sealed off is a new thing, then it makes it less believable that it is still alive, and it also makes it far less believable that no one knows of this location. This hideout is also not deep underground because the tree is able to receive sunlight and the hideout does not have a roof, which means that this place has some kind of footprint at ground level, and as we are not ever shown what this structure looks like from the surface, it is very difficult to theorize as to how on earth this thing has remained hidden. I find all of this pretty difficult to accept, particularly because Silco has control of the Undercity. He has spies, agents, and moles, and he is directly motivated to locate and destroy the Firelights. If this were instead a location that was explicitly known about, but was perhaps thought to be abandoned or inaccessible, then this could have been slightly more believable. Maybe they could have set up in Act 1 that Ekko liked to play in the old tree, the single remaining tree in the Undercity, before a cave-in damaged the tunnel used to access it. During the time jump, he and the other Firelights repaired the tunnel without making it obvious that they had done so, which then might make it more believable that no one comes here. The polluted air in the Undercity is important both for world-building reasons, historical reasons, and thematic reasons. Silco poisons the Chem Barons during their meeting, and the visuals that accompany this are that the overhead fan turns off and Sevika opens a can of compressed air. The other key pieces of information are that people from the Undercity at one point worked in the mines, and this is implied to have been involuntary, and Silco describes the air as being so thick that it clogged your throat and got stuck in your eyes. Ekko also tells Heimerdinger later that
air is denser.
With all of this added together, we can deduce a reasonable explanation for the disparity in the quality of the air and Silco's apparent immunity to it. What we can draw from this is that the air in the Undercity is of lower quality than the air on the surface. As there is no physical barrier between the two, the explanation for this must be that the pollution is somehow heavier or thicker than normal air, hence the air being more heavily polluted in the Undercity due to gravity, which also lines up with Ekko's explanation. The people of the Undercity lived and or worked in this heavily polluted air and developed an amount of resistance or immunity to it until Silco pulled them up from the depths, as he puts it. This particular building has a fan in the ceiling, which I don't think is anything as complex as an air filtration system. I think this is very likely just a fan that keeps cool air cycling into the building. When Silco turns this off, Sevika opens the can of air from the lower parts of the Undercity where he lives, and none of the other Chem Barons are able to handle it. They have not spent time amongst the people, as Silco has. They have acquired their wealth, and they now live in tall towers away from the problems of the Enforcers and Piltover. This is why Finn suggests making a deal with Piltover, because his life is actually pretty good. This is also why the Enforcers need to wear their gas masks whenever they come into the Undercity, because the air down there is of very low quality. Excellent. Well, this all slots nicely into place, both thematically and in terms of world building, so whatever are we to do about the seemingly unfortunate fact that Caitlyn, a topsider who has never been to the Undercity before, does not wear a gas mask at any point? Nor does she cough, nor does she mention, "Hey Vi, this place smells like a diamond-ranked League of Legends player." Well, there are actually 3 tiers to the air quality in Arcane, although this is not immediately clear. We have the normal clean air that is breathed by all of Piltover, as well as everyone across the river fortunate enough to be at a high enough elevation to avoid most of the pollution, which includes all of the chem barons. We then have the Undercity air, which is a bit shit, but it isn't going to straight up suffocate you, and it is likely similar to being in certain Indian or Chinese cities. This air is breathed by all characters that live in the Undercity. And thirdly, we have the air from the mines and the fissures. This stuff is toxic and will kill you. This is what Silco brings with him to poison the chem barons, and this is also what Jayce theorizes Viktor may have breathed too much of when he was younger. Now, regarding the mines. This implies that the topsiders forced Silco's predecessors to work in mines, and one possibility is that this was partly how Piltover was constructed. I don't think this particularly works, however, as it makes the idea that Heimerdinger was unaware of the plight of the Undercity impossible to accept. If Heimerdinger was the father of Piltover, and Piltover was at least partially constructed by workers from the Undercity who were struggling to breathe due to the toxic air, then whether or not this was literal slave labor is irrelevant. Heimerdinger would have known, as he would have overseen construction of the city. Another possible explanation is that Silco is referring to the events that immediately preceded his initial revolt with Vander. At this point, well over 100 years following the construction of the city, it is far more plausible that Heimerdinger could be unaware of all of this, as he would have had more pressing concerns. As for who was making them work in the mines, and why, and whether this was literal slavery or just a shitty job, I have no idea. And this is not really something that can be drawn out of Season 1 of Arcane without some serious guesswork. The mines are only mentioned once, but we also have the suggestion from Jayce that Viktor is sick because of gases in the fissures. These 2 bits of evidence indicate quite clearly that some parts of the Undercity are heavily and dangerously polluted. Given the evidence we get in Arcane, I am virtually certain that what I have just described was what the writers intended to be true of their setting. So why is it that this toxic air world-building element seems upon a casual viewing to be inconsistent, ill-explained, and easy to misunderstand? Primarily, I think this is because we never see any part of the Undercity where the air is so polluted that it is not breathable. We only get a single passing reference to the mines and Jayce's speculation about gases in the fissures. Because of how easily this can be missed or misunderstood, it is very easy to presume that the air is this bad in all of the Undercity, which quite simply cannot be the case. Now moving on to general storytelling. There are some question marks, particularly in Act 3, regarding the logistics of characters moving around the world. This comes about because Arcane is, again, irritatingly vague with its geography, and yes, I know I can go on Google and find a map that explains everything, but alas, the contents of Google is not a part of Season 1 of Arcane. Probably the most questionable instance of implausible navigation is when Jinx arrives at Caitlyn's house in Episode 8. How did Jinx get into Caitlyn's house? Yes, she is totally fucking roided on Shimmer, so she is really quick and stuff, but I'm terribly sorry, Arcane is better than that, and so this is not an acceptable scattershot justification that will allow us to hand-wave Jinx being able to do things that should not be possible. Before I break this down, I will highlight what appears to be a similar moment of questionable logistics from Act 2, when Silco and his 2 goons manage to get into Marcus's house when he is not at home. This is plausible, because Silco is not known to be a crime lord. He can absolutely just walk through Piltover, possibly with his hood up, possibly not, head to Marcus's house that he would very likely have been keeping an eye on anyway, given his reason for being there, covertly broken in, and waited for Marcus to return. There are some parts here that still rely a little on Silco being lucky, but nothing that makes this fundamentally unbelievable. We don't need to see how Silco did this in order to accept it. In the case of Jinx showing up in Caitlyn's bathroom, this occurs very shortly after a huge explosion on the bridge, which Caitlyn was also present for, and which Caitlyn miraculously survived. This also came not long after another explosion which claimed the lives of 6 more enforcers. They are dropping like flies, and Caitlyn somehow keeps surviving these attacks, and so it would not be at all unreasonable for her mother to station guards outside their house. Jinx has also just been named by Vi to the council as the culprit. Piltover is, or at least should be, far more alert than they were in episodes 4 and 6. Additionally, Caitlyn is much richer than Marcus, and so we can reasonably assume that her house is in a much nicer part of the city that would be harder for Jinx to infiltrate without raising suspicion. Additionally, we have already seen earlier in this very episode that Cassandra is extremely cautious of anyone breaking into her home. Not only did Jinx manage to do this, but she also managed to incapacitate Caitlyn and take her through Piltover and back into the Undercity without anyone noticing. To summarize, Jinx being able to get into Caitlyn's bathroom undetected relies entirely on sci-fi bullshit. Or, in other words, she is so juiced on shimmer that she is inhumanly fast, agile, and sneaky. How believable this is entirely down to the viewer, but personally, I think the writers could have done a much better job in clarifying exactly how Jinx managed to do this, because, frankly, all of the surrounding evidence strongly suggests that this should not have been possible. Arcane is extremely dense in terms of character content and thematic content. Even the smallest, most seemingly insignificant characters can be astonishingly important. But one of the ways that Arcane manages to remain digestible and coherent is that each episode generally follows a pattern. As the various storylines gradually build in tension, they are often intercut with each other, which is nothing new. But Arcane also typically starts each episode with a flashback, or some other means of establishing character backstory or motivation. In virtually all cases, these introductions depict key moments for the central characters of Arcane, in which their core beliefs are firmly established, as well as providing some kind of thematic through-line for each episode. The flashback in episode 1 establishes why Vi hates Piltover and the Enforcers, and also establishes why Vander chose to stop fighting. It establishes the setting, as well as one of the primary conflicts of the series. The flashback in episode 2 establishes why Jayce is so driven to use magic to help people. This helps to explain everything Jayce does in this episode in particular. The flashback in episode 3 establishes Silco's extreme perseverance and ruthlessness, and to set up his relationship with Vander that is extremely important in this episode. We only see the end of this flashback at the end of the episode, where Silco stabbing Vander is juxtaposed with Vander stabbing Silco. Episode 4 does not begin with a flashback, but instead starts with Heimerdinger telling Jayce the story of Stanwyck Pedidly, which establishes what will become Jayce's core conflict for the rest of Season 1. This dialogue may have been planned as a flashback, but was recontextualized as a conversation between Jayce and Heimerdinger, so as to leave Heimerdinger's history with Stanwyck Pedidly ambiguous. The flashback in episode 5 asks the open question as to what Caitlyn is shooting for. The episode later answers that question when she shoots Sevika to save Vi. The flashback in episode 6 establishes Viktor's gifted mind, his loneliness, naivety, and his desire to help people. Episode 7 also does not begin with a flashback, but instead begins with a stylized hip-hop music video depicting the Firelights, and the lyrics establish who the Firelights are and why they do what they do. The Firelights are a huge unanswered question at this point in the series, and as the episode focuses heavily on Ekko in particular, it makes sense for the episode to open up with a focus on the Firelights. The flashback in episode 8 establishes Mel's motivation and introduces us to the character of Ambessa and the relationship they have. And finally, episode 9 also does not begin with a flashback, and resumes immediately following the cliffhanger ending of episode 8, making this the only episode with a cold open in which the characters immediately have to deal with the events of the previous episode. This break in the pattern emphasizes how much of an impact this has upon Jayce, as the writers do not give us any kind of relief in the form of easing us into the aftermath via the usual flashback. We are instead unexpectedly dropped straight into the drama as Jayce comes to terms with the fact that he just killed a child. In addition to the sequential flashbacks that open each episode, the motives of each character are typically established very early on, which means that despite the complexity of the narrative and the intertwining of many characters, the audience is never left wondering, wait, why is this character doing that? At the start of the season, the plot is driven by the Council and the Enforcers who want to arrest the kids, and by Jayce who wants to harness the power of magic to help people, which is established in his opening scene. Viktor wants the same thing as Jayce, which is established later in the same episode. Heimerdinger wants to stop Jayce, and Heimerdinger's motive of wanting to protect Piltover from dangerous magic is also established in his opening scene. Vander is thrown around by the plot. He wants to maintain peace, but he is not proactively pursuing a specific objective. Sevika wants the Undercity to be independent, and this is established in her opening scene. Marcus wants to find the culprits of the explosion in episode 1, which is also established in his opening scene, although his motivation changes dramatically after the events of Act 1. Silco's actions are incredibly important, but his motive remains a mystery until episode 3. The middle portion of the story is primarily driven by Caitlyn, who wants to find the people behind the attack on the airship, and this is established within the first 15 minutes of episode 4. Vi is thrown around by the plot until episode 5, at which point her goal becomes to find powder. Ekko wants revenge on Silco, which is established shortly after his identity is revealed in episode 7. Mel wants Piltover to thrive, and she wants to be powerful, although we do not have the full context as to why until episode 8. Ambessa wants to use Hextech proactively against her enemies, which is established in her opening scene. And finally, Jinx only ever views herself in comparison to other people. She never pursues a goal of her own that does not relate to how other people will see her. She takes the crystals because she wants to impress Vi. She tries to help rescue Vander because she wants to prove to everyone that she can be competent. She attacks the Enforcers and steals the gemstone to prove to Silco that she isn't weak and can be relied upon, and the first thing that she does that she truly wanted to do is the final thing that she does in Season 1, firing a missile at Piltover. Something I have been waiting to properly dive into with Arcane is the multiple instances of what appears to be plot armor. This occurs multiple times throughout the series, and as you might expect, this section of the video is going to be somewhat more critical than it has been so far. Plot armor is a form of plot contrivance, and as with all plot contrivances, I find it very helpful to consider what the consequences of the instances of plot armor actually are, as this can help to understand how much of a problem they are.
He's dead.
If a character falls out of a plane, walks it off, and they are never seen again, then their plot armor means nothing narratively. It is just an extremely weird decision that doesn't have any kind of purpose. If the character falls out of a plane, walks it off, and then proceeds to save the hostages at Nakatomi Plaza from Alan Rickman, then the writers have broken their movie because they demonstrably do not understand how cause and effect work, and so the scene would need to be rewritten in such a way that the character does not fall out of a plane. All of this fundamentally comes down to immersion, and the reason why writers will typically avoid plot armor is so that their stories are more believable. If you are watching a film and you can see the writers moving things around and arbitrarily deciding which characters die and when, then the audience will be very much aware that they are watching a film, and immersion has been broken. The magic trick has failed. So what exactly is plot armor? Plot armor is when a character survives something that the audience has not been given an adequate reason to believe that they would survive. There are many things that can affect how bad an instance of plot armor is, including how stylized the medium is, how closely the story adheres to real-world physics, as well as any fantasy or sci-fi elements that are in play, such as if the character in question is a superhero or an alien creature. Plot armor refers specifically to when the plot unjustifiably treats certain characters differently so as to ensure that they do not die when we have every reason to believe that they otherwise would. Maybe they survive a nuclear explosion by hiding in a fridge. Maybe they fall off of a 5-story building, hitting everything on the way down, and then simply walk it off. Maybe they take a volcano to the face. There are ways to justify all of this. Maybe the story is being told by a narrator who is as unreliable as he is invisible, and therefore these moments are exaggerated because of creative license. Maybe Indiana Jones, John Wick, and Galadriel are all indestructible cyborgs. I am half joking, but let's actually roll with this for a moment. Let's say that they revealed, after John Wick falls off of a 5-story building and hits every object on the way down, that he received cybernetic implants off-screen after the end of John Wick 2. If we handwave the fact that this kind of technology does not exist within the John Wick universe, this would potentially justify why he was able to survive such an absurd injury that would kill a normal person 5 times over. The fact that the writers can potentially make up a way to justify it retroactively might technically mean that this is no longer plot armor, but it would instead become incredibly manipulative storytelling, as the writers are intentionally hiding information from the audience until after the absurd moment is over, so that they can bait the "holy shit, did John Wick just die" moment. If the writers of John Wick were to retroactively decide that he received cybernetic implants that made him invulnerable to fall damage, then this would absolutely come off as the writers retconning their story and shoehorning in an explanation out of thin air, which I think is slightly distinct from the term plot armor, but the end result is the same, and so this is a distinction without a difference. The hand of the writer is nakedly obvious, thus leading to a breaking of immersion. But anyway, enough pretext, let's get back to Arcane. I will quickly list off every instance of what could be considered plot armor in Arcane, as well as a couple that are commonly cited that I do not consider to be plot armor, before exploring how much of a problem each instance presents. Vi surviving the explosion at the workshop in episode 1. Jayce surviving the same explosion at the workshop in episode 2. Vi surviving against Silco's men, specifically when Deckard grabs her by the neck in episode 3. Powder surviving her own explosion in episode 3. Singed surviving Powder's explosion in episode 3. Silco's random goons surviving Powder's explosion in episode 3. Ekko surviving Jinx's minigun on the airship in episode 4. Caitlyn surviving the explosion in the square in episode 4. Vi surviving being stabbed in the side by Sevika in episode 5. Vi and Caitlyn surviving the water tower collapsing in episode 6. Ekko surviving being shot point blank by Marcus in episode 7. Ekko and Caitlyn surviving Jinx's explosion on the bridge in episode 7. Jinx and Ekko surviving Jinx's other explosion on the bridge in episode 7. And Jayce surviving the chem tank guards in episode 8. Let's filter out the ones that I do not consider plot armor, as I consider the character's survival to be justifiable given the context. Ekko survives Jinx on the airship because of decisions his Biker Mice from Mars buddy made. Vi survives her stab wound because of decisions Caitlyn made, as well as the fantasy drug that exists within the setting. Vi and Caitlyn survive the water tower because they were lucky, which, yes, is not a character decision, but I don't consider this to be on the level of plot armor given what we actually see. Vi surviving the explosion at the workshop is possible because the crystal was in another room when it exploded, and so her not getting vaporized is definitely a possibility. The animators took a risk here, as they wanted the explosion to look really big and dramatic. However, if you slow it down, Vi does appear to get out before the shockwave actually hits her. Jayce survives the same explosion, but is knocked out because the shockwave doesn't directly hit him, although this does make me wonder why the wall between the hallway and the workshop wasn't blown out given the damage. Ekko survives being shot by Marcus because he has a bulletproof vest on, which is a perfectly valid explanation. Marcus not noticing makes sense, as he immediately shoots Ekko without checking. Perhaps you could say it is lucky that Marcus didn't go for the head, but as the chest is a far easier target and given the stakes for Marcus, I don't think Marcus is dumb for shooting Ekko in the chest. Additionally, Silco's random goons surviving Powder's explosion leads to exactly nothing, with the exception of Locke, and Locke disappears from the bridge during episode 3, so we can reasonably infer that either someone dragged him to safety before the explosion, or that he woke up and walked away himself. Now for the ones that do matter. Vi surviving against Silco's men, I don't have a problem with, honestly, because as I explained in part 1, we have ample references to suggest that this is plausible. But I do have a problem with her surviving Deckard. Deckard grabs Vi by the throat, and he does not kill her when he would have every reason to do so. The last time we saw Deckard, he was an impossibly fast insta-kill machine who got a pentakill without batting an eye. Additionally, at this point, there is no reason why Silco would want Vi alive. I don't buy the theory that maybe Silco was impressed with Vi and wanted her to join him, because he did not communicate this to Deckard, and I don't consider it reasonable to suggest that this happened off-screen, given what happens on-screen. This essentially boils down to the writers wanting to heighten the already excellently escalating drama by drawing out the tension further. I view this in pretty much the exact same way that I view a scene in the third act of Aliens, where an egg slowly opens and a facehugger slowly thinks about maybe leaving the egg sometime soon. This is the exact opposite of how facehuggers have been shown to act until this point, and the reason this happens is, again, to heighten the tension even more during an incredibly intense sequence. This is a minor criticism of Aliens, as this absolutely constitutes plot armor. Had the facehugger not been really slow for some reason, Newt wouldn't have had time to scream, and Ripley wouldn't have found her in time. Now that I've criticized one of my favorite movies, I'll get back to criticizing one of my favorite TV shows. Deckard could have and would have killed Vi on the bridge. And so this moment also constitutes plot armor. Maybe Deckard was tired, maybe he recognized Vi and he wasn't sure that he wanted to kill her, maybe he wanted to take his time and hurt her before finishing her off. These are all possible, but they would hold a lot more water had we not already seen Deckard blast his way through 5 people in seconds, and so this is all relatively baseless speculation. Powder surviving her explosion. I didn't even notice this one until about the 6th time I watched the episode, but Powder is of course thrown into the air by her explosion. She is standing at the top of the cannery. The cannery is at least 2 stories tall, and she didn't fall into the river because she is not wet when we next see her. This means that she fell directly onto the ground below and didn't sustain any kind of injury. I am not sure that I'm willing to call this plot armor because we don't actually see it happen, and so we don't know exactly where she landed, and because you could potentially survive falling from that height depending on how you land. But regardless, this does seem a little odd to see Powder get blasted off a building and then show up like, hey, I'm fine. That said, including a shot to show the audience that Powder landed in a bush and she's totally okay, would have completely ruined the pacing and the escalation of tension in those critical 10 minutes or so in episode 3, so I will not fault the show for doing this. Singed also survives the explosion in episode 3. We see afterwards that he is badly singed but seems to be entirely functional. This one is absolutely plot armor. There is no way Singed could have survived this unless we say, well, when Shimmer explodes, it's just, a super shit explosion that nonetheless looks really dramatic, but it's totally chill, you can just kind of be inside it and not care. I know that Rings of Power taught us that evil fire is not hot, some of the time at least, and I know that this is fantasy, and so yes, Shimmer could absolutely do whatever it needs to in order to allow the plot to happen, which is another way of saying he survived because magic. We see the Shimmer catching fire as Singed realizes what is happening, and had they stopped right here, then alright, I guess I can maybe buy this, as we don't see exactly what Singed does in response or what happens next, much like in the case of Powder falling off the roof. The difference here, however, is that we do see what happens next. The entire room is engulfed in an explosion. Singed is inside that room. Singed is surrounded by Shimmer, which is highly combustible. Therefore, without any other explanation, Singed should have died, and therefore this is clear-cut plot armor. Caitlyn survives the explosion in episode 4. Whether or not this is technically plot armor, it is absolutely immersion breaking. People survive things like this all the time in stories, and suspending various degrees of disbelief is a prerequisite when dealing with this kind of thing, but the problem in this instance is not that Caitlyn survives. The problem is that Caitlyn is the only person who does survive. All 6 of the other enforcers die, and yet Caitlyn somehow survives with no serious or long-term injuries. This could have been easily fixed by simply having Caitlyn be further away from the explosion, or by having her take cover behind another building or something, but as depicted, this one is also pretty clear-cut plot armor. Caitlyn surviving Jinx's explosion on the bridge in episode 7 is about as clear a case of plot armor as we are going to get in Arcane. This little explodey bug lands on the end of Marcus's gun, which is at most 2 feet from Caitlyn's face. This explosion was about as far from Marcus as it was from Caitlyn, and the result of this explosion is that Marcus has his arm blown off and dies as a result, whereas Caitlyn receives a cut on her leg and appears to be struggling to walk. Additionally, all 10 enforcers who are wearing body armor and helmets, appear to die in the blast, minus the one that Jinx executes. This is yet another very clear instance of Caitlyn surviving because she is a main character. The fix for this would again have been pretty easy, as all we would need to do is move Caitlyn further away from Marcus, at which point her survival becomes less of an issue, because maybe there were none of these explodey bugs 2 feet from her face. Ekko surviving this same explosion I don't consider to be a problem for precisely this reason, because he is on the ground already after having been shot by Marcus, and we are not shown that there is an explodey bug right next to him, as is the case with Caitlyn. Ekko and Jinx survive Jinx's second explosion. This one appears to be one that the writers wanted to address. I'll play that again for you. A split second before the explosion, you can hear what is presumably intended to be Ekko knocking the bomb away from them with his club. The fact that this is addressed, albeit in a very minor way, means that I can't actually be too hard on this. We have already seen that these bombs are rather powerful, but we have never actually seen Jinx use one single bomb at a time. The closest example of this that we have is in episode 4. And whilst these explosions are presumably deadly, they are not shown to be anywhere near as catastrophic as they are when she uses multiple bombs at once. Jinx's injuries are described as severe by Singed, and she has to undergo some very extensive treatment to recover, and the severity of this treatment is more than adequately built up, as I explained earlier. Jinx suffers serious consequences for this explosion. Ekko, on the other hand...
Yeah, I'm fine. I just sprained my ankle.
My guess is that his leg is broken rather than sprained. Given that we hear Ekko knock the bomb away from himself at the last second, and given that these bombs do not appear to make cataclysmic fireballs of murder when used individually, I don't have any particular problem with Ekko's relatively minor injuries in this case. This seems to be more of a problem than it actually is, because I can guarantee that most people will not have caught the teeny tiny sound effect that helps to explain how this is possible, and I can guarantee this because I have seen Arcane multiple times, and I did not notice this until it was pointed out to me. And finally, Jayce survives the Chemtank guards. These Chemtank guards shred their way through the Enforcers, and given the speed they appear to move at, as well as their aggression, they are somewhat comparable to Deckard in Act 1. Then, after dealing with the Enforcers, they rather conveniently slow right down to deal with Jayce. This kind of thing can usually be somewhat hand-waved by saying, well, they're playing with him, they want to take it slow and they want to make sure this hurts. The problem is that these things appear to be brain-dead shimmerheads who are kept in a somewhat comatose state until they are pumped full of drugs and pointed at their enemy. They are berserkers, not calculating villains. Vi being able to hold her own against these things is far more believable because she has been shown multiple times to be a very skilled fighter, which is then amplified by the Hextech gauntlets. Jayce, conversely, is a nerd, and the fact that he is a blacksmith and the fact that he has chiseled abs does not mean that he should be capable of dodging and parrying blows from these Chemtank guards, who moments earlier carved their way through multiple Enforcers. To put this bluntly, the average rando Enforcer should be far more skilled in combat than Jayce. The fact that Jayce appears to be exponentially more capable than them, unfortunately, comes off as though his skill has been inflated because he is a champion from League of Legends. To summarize, and I will be as charitable as I can, Vi in episode 3 and Jayce in episode 8 survive entirely because their opponents dial back their lethality due to Vi and Jayce being main characters. Singed and Caitlyn survive multiple explosions, which simply cannot be explained given what happens to the other people in these same explosions. That gives us 5 instances of plot armor, 3 of which I consider egregious. Before we wrap up, I will quickly go through what I am worried about for Season 2. There is an incredible amount of potential, but there are also some clear narrative decisions that the writers could make that I think may detract from the importance of certain events in Season 1, namely Vanda's death and Jinx blowing up the Council. All of this is with the caveat that Season 1 absolutely surprised me, because as I have said previously, a League of Legends TV show has no right being anywhere near this good. So, first off, Jinx is gone. I'm not saying they can't have her return to some semblance of sanity, but it is going to take a lot of work to make this convincing and believable. If Season 2 dedicates substantial time yo-yoing her back and forth while Vi tries to get her sister back, then it risks feeling like the show is retreading old ground. That story is done, it is time to move on. Also, if Vanda comes back, I will be disappointed. I think this is all but confirmed, but I think it will be tricky to balance the nature of his return with the emotional impact this will have on both Vi and Jinx. Now, regarding the Council and the final cliffhanger of Season 1. Hoskell, Salo, Shula, and Cassandra are all dead. They are regular people, and they are gone. And if the writers contrive a way to make them not die in the opening minutes of Season 2, then I will let out a tremendous sigh of disappointment. Bulwark is some kind of robot man, so if he survived, it wouldn't necessarily break anything, although I would be very surprised if the writers decide to keep Bulwark alive. Which leaves us with the three primary characters who are also present: Mel, Jayce, and Viktor. I think that Mel is going to die in the blast. I think that narratively and thematically, it makes sense to do this. This would be the ultimate consequence for Jayce's creation of Hextech, and this would further motivate Ambessa to protect what remains of her family. She will have lost 2 of her children, and although she may only have 2, the show is not specific, Mel's death would cause Ambessa to go nuclear, which would very obviously cause major conflict in Season 2. I don't particularly want Jayce to survive, because I feel like his story has reached a natural end. However, the writers could feasibly keep him alive without it feeling too much like plot armor. I think the justification for this is going to be something related to the shield from his hammer. Yes, he doesn't have the hammer with him, but given that he has this technology, the writers may reveal that he has a little wrist-mounted shield or something, which could be justified as he went to meet Silco in episode 9, and so it would be quite reasonable for him to have some kind of safety measures in the form of technology that we know he has access to. If this is what happens, then I would have preferred that it be set up a little better in Season 1, because if the writers literally do what I just described, then this will be almost identical to John Wick's hypothetical retroactive cybernetic implants that I described earlier. Alternatively, and I like this idea slightly better, Viktor will protect Jayce and allow himself to be hit by the blast in the process. This would be justified due to the various enhancements he has received, but as a result of this, Viktor must take catastrophic damage. This would then force Jayce to use the Hex Core to save Viktor's life, which will then lead to Viktor becoming one with the Omnissiah. This would also present Jayce with a very difficult moral decision, as if I am correct with all of my assumptions, Mel will have just been killed alongside the rest of the Council, and so Jayce may well be unwilling to lose Viktor as well, causing him to break his promise to Viktor that he would destroy the Hex Core, and Jayce's actions in using the Hex Core to keep Viktor alive will presumably irreparably damage their friendship. All of this could be totally wrong, but given where Mel, Jayce, and Viktor's stories are at the end of Season 1, I think all of this is a pretty safe bet. With that, we have finally reached the conclusion of Season 1 of Arcane. I don't have anything else I'd like to say on the topic, but I will provide a summary of my thoughts here. There are many trends that have become apparent in the last decade or so in film and TV. Characters will act like idiots to fulfill the needs of the plot. Characters will repeatedly tell each other things that they already know in order to deliver information to the audience. Characters and plot devices will exist for one, or very occasionally, 2 purposes. Risks are not being taken, and properties are relying heavily on nostalgia. Seemingly 90% of films or series that come out are either sequels no one asked for, or retellings of stories that have already been told elsewhere. None of this is true of Arcane. Arcane is a show in which every character is fully fleshed out and believable within the setting. The dialogue is astonishingly detailed, intelligent, frequently multi-layered, and never exists solely to speak to the audience, because the writers made the bold decision in this day and age to treat their audience with respect. Arcane is of course based on the League of Legends video game, and as such it was dangerously at risk of repeatedly throwing in references to the game, and dwelling on them for no reason other than that it's a thing from the game. There are of course many moments of fan service in Arcane, but these never come at the expense of the story that is being told. The only instance of fan service that I think could have been handled better is Jayce's fight scene. But even then, this fight scene has very important consequences on the setting and on Jayce as a character, and this is aided by the fact that the writers chose to contrast the upbeat and energetic fan service fight scene with a devastating and shocking finale. There is a massive difference between your typical fan service in Arcane, such as, oh look, there's a Krug, and your typical fan service in Rings of Power, which, if translated into Arcane, would be something like,
"Oh no, Vi's in prison. Don't worry, there is one person alive, powerful enough to bust Vi out of there. Oh my god, it's Syndra."
The visuals in Arcane are truly unique and are simply exceptional. I have pointed out some details that I have noticed throughout the series, but there are no doubt many more that I missed because analyzing this kind of thing in animation is not really my thing. The music is consistently fantastic. Yes, even the theme song, fuck you. The voice acting is excellent and occasionally masterful. If I could sum up why Arcane is so good in 2 words, it would be depth and clarity. The show sets up these fascinating characters and then pushes them to the extreme, testing them relentlessly. The show never cheats its audience outside of the aforementioned instances of plot armor, which I consider to be the weakest element of the show as a whole. Now that I have spent many hours drawing out the plot and characters of Arcane, I am now just going to quickly tell you my personal favorite moments from Season 1. The prologue on the bridge. Marcus confronting Vander.
"You're just a small man in a little hole the world forgot to bury."
Vi protecting the family. Vander's last stand. Vi and Powder's final scene. Jayce becoming a politician. Jinx letting Powder die.
Just like you were always meant to be.
Jinx lighting the flare. Jinx versus Ekko. Viktor runs free. Jayce and Viktor agree to destroy Hextech.
We lost ourselves, lost our dream. In the pursuit of great, we failed to do good.
Sevika kills Finn.
Were you tempted?
Not for a worm like him.
Jayce and Silco finally meet.
Your people wouldn't stand a chance.
Silco's drink with Vander.
Is there anything so undoing as a daughter?
Silco's final moments.
Don't cry. You're perfect.
The monster you created. And just because I know some people are going to ask me, here is my ranking of the episodes in Season 1. Honestly, episodes 3 and 9 are definitely at the top, everything else is pretty similar, and my order could change on any given day. And finally, here is the screen time data that I collected just to satiate my own curiosity. Vi is predictably way out in first place, followed by Jinx, Jayce, Silco, Caitlyn, and Viktor. I also think it is worth mentioning just how much screen time Vander, Milo, and Clagger have, despite only appearing in the first 3 episodes, which certainly helps to make their deaths that much more shocking. A lot of the minor characters, such as the counselors, are artificially inflated because they are present in every scene in the council chamber, even if they don't actually do anything, so these numbers shouldn't be used as any kind of accurate representation of how much time the show dedicates to each specific character. But with that, dear viewer, we have reached the end of my analysis of Season 1 of Arcane. I am very much looking forward to Season 2, and if you want me to make videos on Season 2, please do like, share, subscribe, comment, and all that good stuff. Making this series has absolutely been a labor of love, and although looking at it in this amount of detail has revealed a handful of problems, my overall appreciation for the show has only gone up due to how incredibly well it can withstand scrutiny. I have my fingers crossed for Season 2, and if Season 2 somehow manages to be on par with or better than Season 1, then Arcane will cement itself as one of the greatest TV shows ever made. Do feel free to check out the second channel where I upload video game streams, the occasional rant video, the music I write for the main channel videos, and some other assorted bits and bobs. And if you fancy jumping in the Discord for a chat, then you are welcome to do so. But anyway, that's all for now. Thank you again so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.